I woke up with a splitting headache in a rundown little house. Memories that weren't mine flooded into my brain like a tidal wave. It took me a long time to sort through them all, and when I did, I realized the truth. I had transmigrated. In my previous life, I was born after the year 2000 in China. I worked for a special government unit, went on a mission abroad, got betrayed, and died taking my enemies down with me. Now I'd landed in the body of a 15-year-old boy who shared my name, Lu Pingyan, in a small village near the capital. The calendar on the wall read August 19th, 1973. This boy's family was huge. There were grandparents, parents, 2 uncles, 2 aunts, and a whole crowd of cousins, all girls. I was the only boy in the entire Lu family, so naturally everyone spoiled me rotten. Grandpa himself picked my name, hoping I'd live a safe and peaceful life. The original Lu Pingyan had gone to the river to catch fish, fallen in, and caught a terrible fever that lasted 3 days. That's when I took over. My mother came in, a woman in her 40s with wrinkled skin and calloused hands. When she touched my forehead and felt the fever was gone, the relief on her face was overwhelming. She scolded me for going to the river and told me the village doctor had said whether I lived or died was up to fate. I felt awkward. In my old life, my parents and grandparents all died in a car crash when I was in high school. After military school and the special unit, I'd almost forgotten what a mother's warmth felt like. My stomach growled loudly, and Mom rushed out to make me egg drop soup. When she brought it back, the smell of eggs, green onions, and sesame oil hit me, and my mouth watered. Sesame oil was a rare luxury in this era. Grandma kept the bottle locked in her cabinet, and one bottle lasted almost a whole year. The fact that it appeared in my soup meant Grandma had handed it over specially for me. Mom tried to spoon-feed me, but I grabbed the spoon myself. I was over 30 inside. No way I could let someone feed me. She laughed and let me eat on my own. I devoured everything, 2 whole eggs worth, and drank every last drop of broth. It was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted, but I still wasn't full. Mom said I couldn't eat too much after 3 days of nothing and told me to wait for dinner when Dad and my sisters came home from work. After she left, a little head with 2 braids peeked around the door, my 5-year-old sister, Lu Yundong. She bounced in, giggling, and told me Mom wouldn't let her in earlier because she was afraid the little one would eat my soup. She hugged my foot and chattered away happily. When I ruffled her hair, she protested that her second sister had spent a long time braiding it for her. I couldn't help laughing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt completely at ease. Living a new life in this era didn't seem so bad. Right then and there, I made up my mind. From now on, I am Lu Pingyan, and I will protect this family. My little sister Yundong told me that Grandpa and Grandma had ordered all the kids to keep me away from the river from now on. I smiled bitterly. The original Lu Pingyan hadn't been pushed. He went fishing on his own for fun. He was nearly 6 feet tall, but barely weighed 100 pounds, skinny as a stick from years of poor nutrition. As the only boy in the family, he never had to work in the fields. He'd just graduated from middle school and was set to start high school in the fall, so he spent his summer days doing nothing. That day his leg cramped up in the river, and he would have drowned if someone hadn't spotted him. The fever that followed was too much for his weak body, and that's when I took over. Yundong told me she was running to tell Grandpa and Grandma I was awake. She added with a grin that maybe Grandma would be so happy she'd stop calling her a money-losing girl. Then she bounced out of the room before I could say a word. Watching her go, I couldn't help but smile. Kids in my original era never had that kind of pure, carefree joy. They were buried under tutoring classes and art lessons. Suddenly my chest felt warm. I reached under my shirt and pulled out a dragon-shaped jade pendant. I recognized it instantly. It had been with me since the day I was born in my previous life. My grandfather had given it to me, saying it was a Tang Dynasty heirloom passed down through generations. Somehow it had crossed over with me. The jade grew hotter and hotter in my hand until it was almost burning. Then a sharp pain stabbed my palm, like something had bitten me. Blood seeped out and soaked into the pendant. Before my eyes, the jade faded and vanished completely. In the next instant, I was standing somewhere else entirely, beside a crystal-clear river. On the left bank stretched dark, empty soil. On the right was a vast grassland. Nearby stood a large wooden building, roughly 1,000 square meters, like a warehouse. I went inside, completely empty. I walked back to the river, scooped up some water, and took a sip. A warm current instantly spread through my whole body. I knew right away, this was a spirit spring. I stripped off my clothes and jumped in. The water stung like 1,000 needles, and dark filth oozed out of my skin. After a few minutes, the pain faded, and I felt stronger than I had since waking up. The weakness in this body had lessened noticeably. I climbed out, got dressed, and wondered how to leave. The moment I thought about going back, I reappeared in my room. I tried going in and out several times. I could enter and exit at will just by thinking about it. So transmigrators really did get a cheat ability. If I'd had this spirit spring space in my last life, I wouldn't have died. I explored further and found a stone tablet with carved text. It explained everything. This was the Jade Dragon Spirit Spring space. The spring water could accelerate crop growth by 60 times. The wooden warehouse froze time inside it. Anything stored there would stay perfectly preserved. And there was a daily check-in feature at the tablet, with random rewards. The text on the tablet blurred and shrank into a single glowing button that said, "Check in." I pressed it. A chime rang out. "Check-in successful. Reward, 20 gene of Ponjin rice, automatically placed in the warehouse." I ran to the warehouse and found a cloth sack full of beautiful white rice. My stomach growled again just looking at it. Then I sensed something and flashed back to my room just in time. Footsteps were approaching, and Grandma's voice called out that she and Grandpa were here to see me. She walked in first, followed by Grandpa with his half-white hair, and behind them trailed little Yundong with her braids sticking up like antennae. I stood up quickly to greet them. Thanks to the spirit spring, I had real strength in my legs now. I felt much better than when I first woke up. Grandma grabbed my hands, tears in her eyes, saying if anything had happened to me, she and Grandpa wouldn't know how to go on living. Grandpa told me to stay away from the river. If I ever wanted fish, he'd send my second uncle or third uncle to catch them for me. He said those two had thick skin and tough bodies, and if they ever refused to do what I asked, he still had the hemp rope he used to whip them with when they were kids. Their love nearly melted my heart. I thought to myself that this warmth alone made the whole transmigration worth it. I promised them again and again that I'd never go near the river, and they finally relaxed. Grandma reached into her pocket and pulled out 3 white rabbit milk candies, pressing them into my hand. She said she'd left home in a hurry and only had 3 on her. I should come to her house tomorrow for more. The moment little Yundong saw the candies, her eyes went round as coins and she swallowed hard, but she didn't dare ask for one. Grandpa and Grandma always said girls were money-losing goods and didn't need to eat so well. I unwrapped one candy and put it in my mouth to make the old couple happy. Sure enough, they both beamed. Then I handed one to Yundong. She looked at Grandma first, not daring to take it until Grandma waved her off, saying if her big brother wanted to share, she could have it, but she'd better remember his kindness. Yundong thanked everyone in the room, then went to a corner and carefully licked every trace of sweetness off the wrapper before eating the candy itself, her face pure bliss. Grandpa told me he still had a meat ration ticket that my eldest aunt had brought from the city last time she visited. He'd give it to my father so Dad could buy me some meat tomorrow. Grandma added that she had about 10 eggs at home and would bring those over too. Her grandson needed proper nourishment after such a serious illness. The 2 old people were clearly barely eating meat themselves. Grandpa hadn't tasted it in over a month, yet they wanted to give everything to me. I tried to refuse the eggs, telling them Mom had already made me 2 eggs earlier. But before anyone could argue, a stampede of footsteps came from outside, and the room suddenly filled with people. 3 men pushed to the front. My father Lu Feijia, second uncle Lu Huijia, and third uncle Lu Baojia. Behind them came a crowd of girls. My second sister Lu Yunxia, third sister Lu Yunxiu, and all the rest. I stood up quickly and greeted everyone. Dad didn't say a word, but the worry lines on his face smoothed out and a small smile appeared. Second uncle, who had an honest, simple look about him, said they'd all been terrified these past 3 days. Third uncle told me that whenever I wanted fish, just say the word and he'd catch it himself. I was the Lu family's golden lump and nothing could happen to me. Grandma wasn't pleased that I was paying attention to everyone else instead of her, so she started chasing people out, complaining they all stank from field work and would make her precious grandson sick. Her word was law. The girls fled the room instantly, and my 2 uncles said a quick goodbye. Third uncle promised he'd go up the mountain soon to hunt some wild game to help me recover. Just like that, the crowd disappeared, and only my father remained. Once the grandparents left, Dad thought the coast was clear and started scolding me, calling me a scrawny brat who had no business trying to catch fish. He said if I weren't fresh out of a sickbed, he'd give me a beating. But he forgot Grandpa and Grandma were still in the room. Grandma's eyebrows shot up instantly. She ordered Grandpa to hit him. Grandpa grabbed a carrying pole from across the room and smacked Dad right on the thigh. Little Yundong's eyes lit up, and she yelled out the door for Mom and my sisters to come watch. Grandpa was beating Dad. My second and third sisters appeared in the doorway, grinning with excitement. I nearly burst out laughing myself. Ever since I was born, Dad had lost his position as the old couple's most beloved eldest son. In this family, a father's status rose or fell based on his children, and I was the golden child. I stepped in and told Grandma that Dad was just trying to scare me. She smiled and told Grandpa to let him off this time. But if he ever really laid a hand on me, Grandpa should beat him until he couldn't sit down. Dad let out a long sigh of relief. The grandparents stayed and chatted with me for another half hour before reluctantly heading home. They lived nearby in the same village, Lupang Village, about 100 households, over 700 people, all scraping by. At dinner, our family of 6 sat down together. My eldest sister Yunshun had already married out, so it was just Dad, Mom, my second and third sisters, little Yundong, and me. Each person got a bowl of corn and wild vegetable porridge. I also had half a cornbread bun. I took one bite of the porridge and could barely swallow it. The corn flour had ground up cobs mixed in, making it rough and scratchy on my throat. But hunger won out, and I finished the whole bowl. I was still only half full, even after the egg drop soup from earlier. I gave the cornbread bun to Yundong and Mom instead. The little one had been staring at it the entire meal. After dinner, Dad told me to stay. He had something important to discuss. Once my sisters cleared the dishes, everyone sat back down. Dad explained that my second uncle on Mom's side had visited yesterday. He worked at the Beijing Snowflake refrigerator factory and could get me a spot as a temporary worker, 27.5 yuan a month with 2 meals included. After 6 months, I could become a permanent employee at 36 yuan a month. In this era, a factory job was an incredible opportunity. The cities had limited positions, and the movement sending educated youth to the countryside was in full swing. My uncle pulling strings like this was a huge favor. The name, Snowflake Refrigerator Factory, triggered my memory right away. I knew its history. Originally the Beijing Medical Equipment Factory, founded in 1956, it produced its first refrigerator in 1962 under the Snowflake brand. But I turned it down. I told Dad the job would be wasted on me. My body was too weak to last 6 months of factory labor, and if I quit before becoming permanent, we'd have thrown away Uncle's goodwill for nothing. I suggested Dad take the job instead. Mom agreed with me. She said I was only 15, still young, and Dad was the better fit, though the position would cost 100 yuan. Dad rolled his eyes at that. He pointed out that when he was 10, he was already doing every kind of work, while I couldn't do anything at 15. But he couldn't push back too hard. If he made me work, Grandpa and Grandma would come after him. Dad warned me that a chance like this was rare and asked me to think carefully. If he went to the city, our family would have 1 fewer person earning work points, and there wouldn't be enough grain to go around for the 5 people left at home. I told him my mind was made up. I'd figure out the food situation somehow. The truth was, I was only 15 and I had no intention of spending this new life tightening screws in a factory. I'd already died once doing hard, dangerous work. This time around, I wanted something different. Dad agreed to take the factory job himself. He was actually a little excited. He'd be the first worker from Lupang Village. I reminded him to go to the village head right away to get a letter of introduction so he could head to the city the next morning. He nodded and left. Back in my room, I looked outside at the darkening sky and sighed. The village didn't even have a single radio, zero entertainment. I thought about the huge stretch of empty land in my spirit spring space and realized I needed to find some seeds to plant. I went to Mom and asked if we had any seeds at home. She shook her head. All seeds were kept by the village collectively. I expected that answer, but it still disappointed me. Mom noticed and promised she'd ask around at work tomorrow to see if she could get me a few. I thanked her, which surprised her. She said I'd never once said, "Thank you," before and wondered if falling in the river had somehow made me smarter. Walking through the yard, I spotted a fat rat scurrying along the wall. My eyes lit up instantly. In a time when people could barely feed themselves, most rats were skinny. A fat rat meant it had a stockpile somewhere. It was mid-August. Plenty of crops had ripened. That rat's burrow would have supplies. I stared at the rat, and it stared back, then bolted. I noticed my eyesight was remarkably sharp, even in the near darkness. I chased it out of the yard until it disappeared under a roof tile. I lifted the tile and found the hole. I grabbed an old, worn-out hoe from Dad's tool shed and started digging. The rat escaped through another exit, but I didn't care. I wasn't after the rat. About a meter in, I hit the jackpot, the rat's food stash. Mostly corn kernels, many half-chewed, plus small amounts of mung beans, red beans, and hazelnuts. I carefully picked out the best ones. 15 perfect corn kernels, for mung beans, for red beans, and 3 hazelnuts. I filled the hole back in and went home satisfied. In my room, I locked the door, lay on the bed, and entered the Spirit Spring space. I planted the seeds right away and watered them with Spirit Spring water. Green sprouts pushed through the soil almost instantly. Even though I'd expected it, it was still amazing to see. The hazelnuts would take years to bear fruit, even with 60 times faster growth, so I planted those in a separate area. I decided that section would become an orchard someday, a garden of 100 fruits. Looking at those little sprouts, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I left the space and immediately fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Mom checked on me during the night, but left quietly when she saw me sleeping peacefully. When I woke up, the sun was already high. Everyone had gone to work except Yundong. She told me Mom had boiled an egg in the pot for me. People in this era didn't eat breakfast, they just went straight to the fields. I washed up and found the egg in the kitchen. As I peeled it, the little one couldn't stop swallowing her drool at the sight of that white egg. I broke it in half and offered her a piece. Her eyes lit up and her hand shot out, but halfway there she pulled it back. She told me Mom said the egg was for me because I needed nutrition after being sick. Drool was literally dripping down her chin as she said it. I was deeply moved. She was dying for that egg, but still tried to refuse. I put the half egg in her hand and told her I couldn't finish the whole thing. She looked at it, swallowed hard, stars practically shining in her eyes, then held it back out to me, turning her head away so she wouldn't have to look at it. She said she'd already drunk a big cup of water and wasn't hungry. I laughed out loud. This little girl's selflessness touched me more than I could say. I told her I was already full and went back to my room. The moment she realized I truly didn't want it, she couldn't hold back any longer. She brought the egg to her lips, eyes curved into happy crescents. I thought to myself that fate had been kind to me this time, placing me in a family full of genuine love. I knew this kind of deep family warmth would fade as the decades passed, and people grew more distant from each other. I needed to treasure every bit of it. Back in my room, I slipped into the Spirit Spring space. Even though only one night had passed, the corn stalks were already as tall as me and starting to form ears. The mung beans and red beans were growing just as well. I figured they'd be ready to harvest by tomorrow morning. The hazelnut trees were still small. They'd need close to a month even with the 60 times growth speed. I went to the stone tablet and pressed the check-in button. The reward this time was 10 Great Unity banknotes, 100 yuan total. That was roughly 3 months' wages for an ordinary worker. Yesterday, 20 jin of rice. Today, 100 yuan. Between the check-in rewards alone, I could live pretty comfortably in this era. My stomach started growling fiercely. A 15-year-old body needs a lot of food, and half a boiled egg wasn't cutting it. I ran to the kitchen and found Yundong still there, licking her half of the egg. She'd only eaten half of her half because she couldn't bear to finish it so quickly. I sent her outside to play so I could figure out lunch. I searched the entire kitchen but couldn't find a single grain of food, just a big water jar half full. I quietly filled the jar the rest of the way with Spirit Spring water. Then I slapped my forehead. Of course there was no food in the kitchen. Grain was too precious. It was all locked in a cabinet in my parents' room, and I didn't have the key. I was starving, so I pulled a big bowl of rice from my space and decided to cook porridge, enough for the whole family. For an excuse, I'd say Grandpa and Grandma had given us some rice out of concern for me. That excuse couldn't be used too often, but it would work for now. The kitchen filled with thick smoke as I tried to light the fire. I'd never done this before. In the military, we rarely cooked over open flames, and the original Lu Pingyan had been so pampered that with all those sisters around, he never had to touch the stove either. Yundong came running in, coughing, and shoved me aside. She called me an idiot, then expertly got the fire going in no time. I felt embarrassed. Decades of life experience, and a 6-year-old girl outdid me. I washed the rice and put it in the pot. The little one planted herself next to it and refused to leave, drool running down her chin as she watched. I put in too little water at first, so the porridge kept getting thicker and I had to add water twice. By the time the big pot of white rice porridge was done, Yundong's shirt was soaked with drool. I filled 2 big bowls and we sat down together. It was scalding hot, but we sipped away happily, both of us grinning. She said it was so much better than the corn and wild vegetable mush. Her little forehead was beaded with sweat. Small as she was, she finished the entire bowl and her belly was round as a ball. She licked the bowl so clean it practically didn't need washing. After cleaning up, I felt real strength in my body at last. I told Yundong we were going to the hills behind the village to pick wild vegetables. She grabbed a bamboo basket right away. I took a wood-cutting knife and we headed out. Picking wild vegetables was just my cover story. What I really wanted was to scout the hills. The original Lu Pingyan's memories told me there were wild chickens and rabbits up there, quite a few of them. Villagers often set traps, but rarely caught anything. Hunting, though, was something I was very good at. All those years of military training weren't for nothing. Of course, I couldn't tell anyone at home I was going hunting. Grandpa and Grandma would have followed me around like bodyguards. Right outside the door, we ran into Granny Zhang, an elderly neighbor. She said she'd heard I was better and had been planning to come check on me. I told her I was fine and just taking my little sister out for some wild vegetables. Yundong greeted her sweetly, and Granny Zhang praised her for being so well-behaved at such a young age. She pulled out a white rabbit candy and offered it to the little one. Yundong didn't dare take it. She looked to me for permission first. I tried to refuse politely, saying Grandma had already given us some candy yesterday. Times were hard for everyone, and offering food was a real act of generosity. But Granny Zhang insisted and pressed the candy into Yundong's hand. I told my sister to say thank you, and she did in her sweet little voice. Granny Zhang reminded us to be careful and not go too deep into the mountains. I promised we wouldn't. Along the way, several more villagers stopped us to ask about my health, and I thanked each one warmly. At the foot of the hill, 20 or 30 kids were bent over picking wild vegetables. Most were 7 or 8 years old, the oldest about 10. The girls carried bamboo baskets while the boys were mostly empty-handed. When they saw me and Yundong arrive, they all rushed over to greet me, calling me Uncle Pingyan. Village seniority rules meant even kids older than me could be a generation below. I told them I needed to go cut some bamboo and asked them to look after my little sister. A sturdy boy named Tai Dan, Granny Zhang's grandson, stepped up right away and promised to take care of her. I gave him my last white rabbit candy as a reward, and the other kids stared with envy. Yundong put on a grown-up voice and told me to go ahead. She'd stay with nephew Tai Dan and wouldn't run off. It cracked me up. She was years younger than him, but outranked him by a generation, and she played the part perfectly. As I walked away, I looked back and saw the kids swarm around Tai Dan, begging to lick the candy wrapper or even just smell it. Tai Dan held his head high and made them a deal. Fill his little aunt's basket with wild vegetables first, then they could take turns licking the wrapper. They all nodded eagerly and surrounded Yundong, helping her pick. It was a little heartbreaking. I shook off the feeling and got to work. I cut down 2 thin bamboo poles, about as thick as a baby's fist, and carried them to the base of the hill. What I wanted to make were bamboo spring traps, a trick I'd learned from a comrade back in the military. I made 7 in total, for catching rats and rabbits, 3 for wild chickens. Rat traps went on paths the rats used regularly. Rabbit traps needed to be placed near burrows. The chicken traps were simpler. They'd snare the bird's foot and hoist it into the air. I used the half-chewed corn kernels I'd saved from the rat hole as bait. I set the rat and rabbit traps first, then climbed a bit higher to where wild chickens roamed. One chicken spotted me and bolted immediately. I grinned, set up my 3 traps, scattered corn kernels around them, and left the rest to luck. With nothing else to do, I found a shady spot at the bottom of the hill and lay down. Before long, Yundong came running over with her escorts, proudly showing me a basket full of wild vegetables. I knew she'd barely picked any herself and the other kids had done most of the work, but I praised her anyway and told her she was the best. She beamed. Then she asked me to watch the basket while she went to help Tai Dan and the others pick their share. She said if they went home empty-handed, they'd get their bottoms spanked. She ran off laughing with her friends. I closed my eyes and drifted off. I woke up to something tickling my nose. Yundong was crouched beside me, brushing a foxtail grass across my face, giggling when I opened my eyes. She said Tai Dan and the others were heading home, and we should go too. I told her to wait a moment while I checked something. The 4 rat and rabbit traps were all empty, which didn't surprise me. Those creatures were mostly active at night. Then I headed for the chicken traps. Before I even got close to the first one, I heard the frantic beating of wings. My eyes lit up. A wild chicken weighing about 3 Gene was dangling in the air, flapping wildly. I grabbed it, reset the trap, and moved on. The second trap was empty. At the third, I heard nothing and expected the same. But when I got close, there was another chicken hanging there, even fatter than the first. I took it down, reset the trap, scattered my last corn kernels, and headed down the hill. 1 chicken for our family to eat, and the other I'd bring to Grandpa and Grandma to help them get some nutrition. When I reached the bottom, Yundong came running up and her eyes went wide at the 2 chickens in my hands. It was meat. She hadn't had meat in a long time. She stared up at me like I was the greatest hero in the world. Yundong asked if I'd really caught those chickens. I joked that they'd walked into my hands on their own. She pouted and said Mom told her lying was wrong. I laughed and told her we were going home to stew wild chicken. Drool poured out of her before she could stop it. She wiped her mouth, but couldn't take her eyes off the birds. Tai Dan and the other kids spotted the chickens too and swarmed around me, swallowing hard. I marched home like some great general with a crowd of little soldiers trailing behind, all of them following us right to our front door before reluctantly scattering. It was still well before noon, so I got to work immediately. Killing chickens I could handle. I'd seen it done plenty of times in the countryside. I drained the blood into a bowl of salted water and put it in the pot to steam gently. The trick to tender chicken blood is enough salt and water and keeping the fire low. Plucking 2 wild chickens only took a few minutes. I chopped them up, rinsed the pieces, put 1 chicken into a big bowl with spirit spring water, and set it to stew. Wild game this fresh needed barely any seasoning, just some salt near the end. I left Yundong guarding the fire while I carried the second chopped-up chicken to Grandpa and Grandma's house, about 5 minutes away. Grandpa was out front hoeing a small vegetable plot. The village had given it to him as a perk from his years as the old village committee chief. When he saw me, he dropped his hoe on the spot. Grandma heard his voice from inside and came rushing out before he could finish a sentence, tossing aside the shoe sole she'd been stitching. She immediately started making me brown sugar water. I told them I'd caught 2 wild chickens at the foot of the hill. I said I'd been lucky enough to spot 2 fighting each other and grabbed them both. One was already stewing at home. This one was for them. They refused right away. Grandma said they were old and didn't need to eat so well, and I should keep both for my recovery. Grandpa backed her up, claiming they were perfectly healthy and had eaten 3 liang of meat just 20 days ago when my aunt visited. I'd expected this, so I had my argument ready. I told them they were my only grandparents, and I needed them strong and healthy to watch me get married someday and help raise my children. That softened them up. Grandpa looked at Grandma for the final word. She scolded him. Why was he looking at her? He should go start the fire already. Did he expect their precious grandson to do it himself? Then she turned to me with a warm smile and handed me the sugar water. I took a sip and told her it was perfectly sweet. She beamed. Grandpa went off to tend the fire obediently. The whole village knew he'd been henpecked his entire life, so he had no pride left to protect in front of me. When I was about to grab a bowl from the kitchen cabinet to stew the chicken in, Grandma stopped me. She handed me a big enamel wash basin instead. She said that she and Grandpa couldn't eat a whole chicken by themselves, and my 2 uncles' families hadn't tasted meat in a long time either. Autumn harvest was coming, and without any oil in their bellies, everyone would lose a lot of weight from the hard work. She wanted to make a big pot of broth so all of them could at least get a taste. She sighed after saying it. I understood. 1 chicken stretched across 3 families was barely anything, but it was better than nothing. Grandpa chimed in from the stove. agreeing with Grandma's plan to share the chicken with the whole family. He added that he'd make sure second uncle and third uncle knew this was all thanks to his beloved grandson. I smiled, grabbed the enamel basin, and secretly filled it with spirit spring water from the water jar when they weren't looking. Soon the chicken was stewing away. I chatted with the two old folks for a while, then said goodbye. I was worried about Yundong being home alone. They walked me to the door and didn't turn back until I was out of sight. At home, the little one had kept the fire going perfectly. I started cleaning the chicken innards. Intestines and gizzards were good stuff, not to be wasted. I checked the steamed chicken blood with a chopstick. No liquid seeped out, so I pulled it from the pot just in time. I found some vinegar and dried chili peppers in the kitchen and got cooking. I made spicy sour chicken blood and stir-fried chicken giblets. For the wild vegetables Yundong had picked, I used a chunk of yellow fat from inside the chicken to fry them up. For dishes total, the whole kitchen smelled incredible. The little one's drool was out of control. She wiped her mouth several times. I couldn't stand watching her suffer, so I put 2 pieces of chicken blood in a bowl and let her eat at the table. The food was just ready when everyone came home from work. Dad had gone to the city first thing that morning to finalize the factory job, then rushed back to the fields. Tomorrow would be his last day in the village. He'd need to transfer his household registration and grain booklet to the city. Second sister Yunxiao smelled the aroma first and guessed it was coming from our house, though Mom laughed and said that was nonsense. Who would be cooking with just me and the little one at home? But Dad sniffed the air and confirmed it. Mom hurried inside, and when they all saw the table, they froze. Third sister Yunxiao screamed, then clapped her hand over her mouth. 4 steaming dishes sat on the table: stewed wild chicken, spicy sour chicken blood, stir-fried giblets, and sautéed wild greens. Everyone's stomachs growled in unison. Mom stared at me in shock. She had no idea I could cook. Before I could explain, Yundong piped up proudly that I'd caught 2 wild chickens, sent one to the grandparents, and cooked the other. Dad ran to his room and came back with his treasured half-bottle of Red Star Erguota liquor. He'd been saving it for a meal worthy of drinking to. The whole family sat down and ate in blissful silence. Everyone stuffed themselves full. The white rice porridge I'd cooked earlier drew another shriek from Yunxiao. She said it felt like New Year. Mom and Dad assumed the rice came from Grandpa and Grandma and didn't ask questions. After the meal, everyone felt their exhaustion melt away and their energy return. They thought it was from the chicken, but the real reason was the spirit spring water I'd used in the cooking and the porridge. It was quietly nourishing their bodies. Over at Grandpa and Grandma's place, things were lively too. Both uncles' families had gathered around that big basin of chicken stew. Second Aunt Winnie praised me, saying I was so young, yet already knew how to take care of the old folks. Grandma's face lit up. She loved hearing people compliment her grandson. She claimed the whole thing was my idea, that I'd specifically said both uncles' families hadn't had meat in ages and should share in it. In truth, it was Grandma who'd thought of sharing, but she gave me all the credit without hesitation. Grandpa backed her up, telling everyone to remember my kindness and help me out whenever I needed it in the future. He said I was a person blessed with good fortune, and they'd all benefit from staying close to me. Third Aunt Zhang Jinlian quickly agreed. She said they all treated me like their own son, and she meant it. After all, I was the only boy in the Liu family. When all these girls married off someday, they'd need a brother to stand up for them if their in-laws ever gave them trouble. Second uncle and third uncle both promised the old couple they'd never let me down. The younger generation stayed quiet. They knew better than to speak up in front of the grandparents, but every one of them was grateful. For most of them, it had been a very long time since they'd tasted meat. Before heading to work, Mom warned me not to go into the mountains. There were wild boars and wolves up there. She said Dad would start his city job tomorrow and come home every few days, and he'd try to buy meat when he could. I shouldn't risk my life for a meal. Dad didn't say much, just patted my shoulder before leaving. From him, that was approval. Once everyone was gone, I decided to go fishing. I discovered I could pull things into the spirit spring space as long as something I controlled was touching them. A kind of medium was needed. I wouldn't go into the river, but fishing from the bank should be fine. My real goal was to stock the empty river inside my space with fish. Raised in spirit spring water, they'd taste incredible. I bent a rusty piece of iron wire into a hook over a flame and tied it to a red string. That was my fishing gear. When I told Yundong we were going fishing, She immediately refused. Mom had ordered her to watch me, and she threatened to tell on me and get my bottom spanked. I explained that fishing meant standing on the bank, no water involved, and I was bringing her along as my supervisor. She thought it over, then made me pinky swear. We locked fingers and chanted together that whoever broke the promise was a puppy. Deal sealed. We grabbed a bucket and headed to the river, stopping to dig up about 30 earthworms on the way. I found a shady spot under some trees and got set up. I'd also discovered I could use the Spirit Spring Space's power to sense everything within about 6 meters around me, and that range was slowly growing. Yindong asked if we'd really catch anything. The river was wide, over 10 meters across at its widest, several meters deep in places. People drowned in it every year or two, so despite all the fish, hardly anyone bothered trying to catch them. I told her to trust me, but reality humbled me fast. Half an hour passed without a single bite. The little one got bored and started dozing off. When she wasn't paying attention, I sprinkled some Spirit Spring water into the river. The surface instantly churned like it was boiling. Fish swarmed in from every direction, many leaping right out of the water. Yundong jolted awake and screamed with excitement. I started flinging fish onto the bank one after another. While she scrambled to grab them, I was secretly pulling fish straight into my Spirit Spring space, over 100 in moments. She was too busy chasing flopping fish to notice. I poured in more Spirit Spring water, and another swarm arrived. I gave up on the hook entirely and just dipped the bamboo pole into the water, touching fish and sweeping them into the space. 200 or 300 fish went in before the frenzy died down. For show, I pulled up one big grass carp, 6 or 7 gene, and called it a day. The bucket was already overflowing with the fish Yundong had gathered on the bank. She was thrilled. On the walk home, we ran into several village elders. They were stunned by our haul. I gave each one a fish weighing over a gene. They waved their hands and tried to refuse, but I insisted, and they finally accepted with big smiles. None of them took it for free, though. They each dug something out of their pockets. Most gave Yundong a white rabbit candy or two. One old man pulled out a potato no bigger than a duck egg, and my eyes lit up. That was a seed I'd been looking for. Back home, I took a fish weighing over 2 gene to Granny Zhang's house. She'd always been kind to the original Lu Ping'an, and I wasn't going to forget that. She tried to refuse until I told her we had plenty more at home. But when I left, she pressed 3 eggs into my hands. I had no choice but to accept. Walking home with those eggs, I felt a wave of emotion. People in this era were so honest and genuine. Everyone understood how precious food was, so nobody took something for nothing. If they accepted a gift, they'd give back whatever they could, because leaving the debt unpaid felt wrong. I wish that kind of sincerity could last forever. At home, I put the 3 eggs away and moved the fish into a big wooden basin to keep them alive. I secretly added some Spirit Spring water, and the half-dead fish perked right back up. Yundong was so fascinated by the fish swimming around that she completely forgot about me. I put the biggest grass carp, over 7 gene, into a bucket and carried it to the grandparents' house. If both uncles' families were sharing, a small fish wouldn't go far enough. Grandpa was resting on a lounge chair under a tree. 6 little cousins from my 2 uncles' families were playing nearby. They'd stayed after lunch. Second uncle's 4 daughters were named after the for noble plants: Yunmei, Yunlan, Yunju, and Yunju. The oldest, Yunmei, was already earning work points in the fields. Third uncle had 3 daughters: Yunxiang, Yunhua, and Yunjing. Little Yunjing was only 4, the youngest in the whole Lu clan. When the girls spotted my fish, 7-year-old Yunju shouted about how huge it was. They swarmed around me until Grandma came out and shooed them away so she could see her grandson properly. The old couple panicked when they saw the fish, worried I'd gone into the river again. I quickly explained that I'd fished from the bank with a pole and hook, standing far from the water, and Yundong had been there the whole time as my witness. They relaxed a little. Grandpa warned me that big fish were strong enough to drag a person into the water, so if I ever hooked one too heavy to pull in, I should just let it go. Grandma grabbed my hand and led me to the lounge chair, telling Grandpa to deal with the fish while she fanned me. I didn't fight it. I told a few of the cousins they could go to my house to play and see the rest of the fish. I was really thinking of Yundong being alone. 3 of them ran off happily. The others stayed to watch Grandpa clean the big fish. Grandma sat beside me fanning while I lay in the chair. The peacefulness was unlike anything I'd felt before, and I drifted off without realizing it. When I woke up, the sun was nearly setting. The girls were playing noisily in the yard, and Grandma immediately scolded them for waking me up. They got quieter but weren't really scared. I stood and stretched. I felt better than ever. Grandpa brought me a cup of warm water. Grandma invited me to stay for dinner, saying the fish was big enough for the whole extended family. But I told them I needed to get home and handle our own fish, and I had things to discuss with Dad. He was leaving for the city tomorrow. They walked me to the gate and turned back. At home, I found 4 little cousins, Manhwa, Yunjiu, Yundong, and tiny Yunjing, all sitting around the fish basin. They'd clearly been watching those fish all afternoon. Several fish were barely moving, so I pulled them out and cleaned them, leaving them ready for Mom and Dad to cook when they got home. After the cousins left, Yundong asked if we could go fishing again tomorrow. I shook my head and told her I was planning to go to the city with Dad. I'd never been to the city in this life, and I genuinely wanted to see it. The real reason was the 100 yuan sitting in my pocket. Money alone was useless in this era. You needed ration tickets to buy anything. I wanted to find a way to buy some tickets in the city, then spend the rest on supplies the family needed. Money only became yours once you spent it. Otherwise, it was just paper. Besides, if I made a trip to the city, I'd have a believable excuse for bringing home new things. Otherwise, everything would have to stay hidden in my spirit spring space forever. I'd been planning this since yesterday. Yundong's eyes sparkled when she heard I was going to the city. She'd always heard there were lots of good things to eat there. She made me promise to bring her back white rabbit candies. I flicked her nose gently and told her I would, but no eating candy at night or she'd get cavities. She had no idea what cavities were. She was just happy about the candy. Mom came home and immediately scolded me for going to the river. Word had already spread through the village about my big haul. Dad, on the other hand, looked at the fish in the basin proudly and boasted that I was just as good as he'd been at my age. Mom gave him a look and said in all their 20-plus years of marriage, she couldn't remember him ever bringing home more than a couple of fish. He went fishing plenty of times, she said, but almost always came back empty-handed. Dad's face darkened, and he complained she was destroying his image in front of the children. The whole family burst out laughing, even Mom herself. She promised to save his dignity in front of outsiders next time. Dad huffed and said that was more like it. Third sister Yunxiu came over and said she had no idea I could fish. I told her fishing was the least of my talents. She'd find out the rest eventually. She laughed it off, but with the spirit spring space, I wasn't really exaggerating. For dinner, Mom went all out for once. Instead of the usual wild vegetable mush, she made cornflour pancakes stuck to the side of the pot and stewed a big pot of fish. The fish had almost no fishy smell, and the meat was wonderfully tender. Pancakes dipped in fish broth. Everyone ate until they were in a daze of happiness. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside. He said my second uncle on Mom's side had invited me to visit. My aunt missed me. Since Dad was heading to the city in the morning anyway, I could go with him. I was overjoyed. This was exactly what I'd been planning to ask. Dad told me to send a few fish to the uncles' families and one to the grandparents. Keep the biggest one as a gift for my uncle in the city, and have Mom dry the rest. He also told me Uncle wanted me to stay at his place for a few days. We'd need to leave by 8 in the morning. The walk to the city took over an hour, and Dad had a full day of paperwork ahead. Factory registration, household transfer, grain ration booklet. He warned me not to oversleep. I went to my room grinning. Spending a few days in the city would make everything much easier. If possible, I wanted to find a hunting rifle to bring back. The hills behind the village were full of game waiting to be caught. I packed 2 changes of clothes, took a bath, and went to bed. The next morning I woke before dawn and immediately entered the spirit spring space. Just as I'd expected, the corn, mung beans, and red beans had all ripened. I harvested everything and brought in yesterday's potato, cut it into pieces, and planted them. Then something amazing happened. I wished out loud that the planting could happen automatically, and the corn kernels in my hand started jumping out on their own, flying into the soil and planting themselves. The beans did the same. Moments later, everything was planted. I thought about watering, and spirit spring water rose from the river and soaked every planted patch. Sprouts pushed up immediately. Once this batch ripened, I'd have enough seeds to fill a huge area. At the Spirit Spring River, a fish weighing over 10 jin leaped out of the water. I was shocked, The biggest fish I'd put in yesterday was only 3 or 4 gene. Looking closer, I saw hundreds of fish swimming in schools, more than I'd put in all different sizes. They were breeding and growing fast in the spirit water. My eyes lit up. My first real source of income was taking shape. This trip to the city would be a perfect chance to look for buyers. I walked to the stone tablet and pressed the check-in button, wondering what today's reward would be. The chime sounded. Check-in successful. 100 gene of premium pork belly, sent to the warehouse. 100 gene of top-quality pork belly. I was thrilled. I ran to the warehouse and found perfectly marbled meat, thick slabs with 5 distinct layers of fat and lean. This had to come from a pig weighing several hundred gene, but I couldn't bring it out yet. There'd be no way to explain it. I left it in the warehouse for now. It was still dark outside. I washed up, drank a big cup of spirit spring water, and quietly slipped out of the house to check my traps on the hill. If anything was caught, I'd grab it before leaving for the city. If not, I needed to collect the traps anyway. I didn't know how many days I'd be gone, and in this heat, any trapped animal would rot before I returned. By the time I reached the hillside, dawn was breaking. The first trap had been dragged from its spot, a great sign. I found it quickly, a fat mountain rat, about 1.5 genes. This time of year rats were at their fattest, gorging on ripening crops. The second trap held another rat, slightly smaller. The third was empty. The fourth made my day, a rabbit weighing 5 or 6 gene, still alive and struggling. If I'd come any later, it might have broken free. Looking closer, I noticed the rabbit had a big belly. She was pregnant. I immediately sent her into the Spirit Spring Spaces grassland. She became the first resident of my little ranch. I popped in after her and watched her happily munching grass. Before long, I'd have baby rabbits too. All 3 chicken traps had caught something. My luck was incredible. Since the snares caught them by the foot, all 3 were alive. 2 roosters and 1 hen. I put 1 rooster and the hen into the Spirit Spring space to breed, and kept the other rooster to bring to my uncle in the city. Back home, everyone was up and surprised to see me coming from outside instead of sleeping in. Dad looked at the 2 rats and the chicken in my hands and nodded approvingly. He said Mom and my sisters wouldn't eat rat meat, so 1 rat could go to Grandpa, who loved them, and the other to my uncle. He called for Yunshio to bring dry rice straw. Dad and I plucked the rats, then singed them over burning straw. We buried them in the hot ashes until the straw burned out completely. When we pulled them out, the skin was a beautiful golden brown with a faint straw fragrance. We gutted them, cut off the heads and tails, and they were ready. Dad sent Yunshio to deliver the bigger one to Grandpa. Then we set off, me carrying the fish and live chicken, Dad with a big bundle on his back holding his clothes and a cotton quilt. All through the village, people stopped us to congratulate Dad on becoming the first factory worker from Lupang village and to marvel at my wild chicken. By the time we finally made it past the village boundary, I let out a breath of relief. Dad laughed and asked if I found everyone's enthusiasm a bit overwhelming. I nodded. He told me that's just how village people were. They genuinely cared. Then his voice grew serious. He said that about 13 years ago, when I was only 2, the family had been so poor they could barely survive. Everyone helped each other through it. During those years, many elderly villagers starved themselves to death so the younger ones could eat. More old people died in that short stretch than in the entire decade that followed. I knew he was talking about the famine years around 1960. The whole country had suffered terribly, and countless people had starved. Dad sighed and said things were still hard now, but so much better than back then. I told him firmly not to worry. Life was going to keep getting better, and he and Mom should get ready to enjoy the good times ahead. I meant every word. I knew what was coming in history. The college entrance exam would be restored and reform would begin, all within just a few years. I planned to use this time to build up our family's foundation. As for high school, I decided not to bother. There was no need. Dad and I walked for over an hour before reaching Dongzaiman Gate and entering the capital. Our first stop was second Uncle Li Jiangwo's house. He'd recently moved, and I'd never been to the new place. I was surprised to find he lived in Dongxi Hutong, along the Fifth Alley, a residential area that had existed since the Yuan dynasty. The alleys were neat and full of everyday life. People on the street kept staring at the live chicken and fish in my hands. Soon we stopped at a courtyard where a familiar figure was waiting, my second uncle on Mom's side. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, clean-faced, wearing clothes faded white from years of washing. He was actually only 2 years younger than Dad, but looked much younger. He greeted us warmly, saying he'd been scared when he visited our village and saw me unconscious in bed. He was relieved Dad had sent word I was fine. He led us inside. Two older women in the courtyard spotted us and greeted Uncle Lee. One complimented me, saying I was as handsome as he described. Uncle introduced Dad as a fellow worker at the Snowflake refrigerator factory and told them I'd be staying a few days. The other woman said anyone in this courtyard was family. I stayed quiet, observing. I'd watched a TV show about courtyard life in my previous life and knew that behind the friendly faces, there could be all sorts of drama. This yard housed about 5 families, not too many, which meant less trouble. A couple of older men also came out to greet Uncle. From their conversation, I learned he was the courtyard's manager, a position with some authority, helping the neighborhood office handle disputes and daily business. At Uncle's door, a girl of about 12 or 13 opened up, my cousin Li Lingy. Behind her came Aunt Zhang Huimei, Uncle's wife. Aunt's health wasn't great. After having Lingy, it took nearly 8 years before she had a son. The little boy was off at his maternal grandparents' place in the countryside, refusing to come home because he was having too much fun chasing chickens and playing in the mud. Lingy clearly didn't mind her little brother being gone. Uncle's home was simple, a kitchen and 3 rooms. Still, he bought the place for nearly 1,000 yuan, which was a lot of money in this era. Very few families could afford that. Uncle told me to stay put while he took Dad to the factory to handle the job paperwork and other business. They left on Uncle's Phoenix brand bicycle. After sitting around for a bit, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked Lingy if she wanted to go out and explore. Her eyes lit up, but she whispered that I'd have to be the one to ask her mom. When she asked, the answer was always no. I called out to Anne in the kitchen and said we wanted to walk around and would be back before lunch. She came out smiling, handed me 1 yuan and a sugar ration ticket, and told us to buy some candy at the supply cooperative as a treat. Lingy huffed. She'd begged her mom for money many times and always been refused, but the moment her cousin showed up, out came the cash. I almost refused but thought better of it and accepted with thanks. Aunt told us not to stay out too long and went back to the kitchen. Lingy and I walked out side by side. Her eyes were spinning with plans for how to spend the enormous sum of 1 yuan. Spending it all on candy was out of the question. She also wanted a pretty hair clip. As soon as we stepped out of the alley, Lingy's eyes kept darting to my pocket. She was already scheming about that 1 yuan. I saw right through her, but didn't mind. I suggested we head to the supply cooperative first, and her face lit up instantly. Walking there, I thought about how valuable 1 yuan really was in this era. Standard flour cost 18 fun per jean. Rice was 20 fun. Boneless pork was only 80 or 90 fun, though you needed a meat ticket. A jean of tofu was just 10 fun with a tofu ticket. Families that could afford the 3 big items were considered well off, and anyone with a black and white TV worth around 400 yuan was downright wealthy. Lingy knew the area well and led us straight to the cooperative. The moment we walked in, she ran to a woman in her 40s and called her Annie. This was Zhang Ximei, her mother's older sister, who worked here. When the woman noticed me, a tall, good-looking stranger beside her young niece, she gave me a sharp, appraising look. But the moment Lingy explained I was her cousin from her aunt's side, the suspicion vanished and she welcomed me warmly, pulling out 5 or 6 white rabbit candies from her pocket for us. Lingy told her aunt she wanted to buy one of the new hair clips the cooperative had just gotten in, but she didn't have a ration ticket. Auntie Zhang smiled and said she happened to have 2 defective ones that didn't require a ticket, 65 fun each. Whether they were actually defective was anyone's guess. I slipped the 1 yuan into Lingy's hand, and she shot me a grateful look before following her aunt to the counter. While they were busy, I took the chance to study the cooperative. It was about 60 square meters, with 5 employees. Working at a supply cooperative was one of the prestigious 8 big jobs. In this era, an iron rice bowl with real social status. Wooden shelves lined the walls with all sorts of goods. Enamel basins and cups in cheerful designs. Classic cigarettes and liquor from the era, including Zhonghua cigarettes and Mao Tai. Things that would still be valuable decades later. I noticed 2 sections that didn't require ration tickets. One had daily necessities, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, yellow paste, pickles, pastries. The other had matches, soap, toothpaste, light bulbs, toilet paper. These were exactly the things I needed to buy, but I wouldn't buy here, not with a relative watching. I couldn't explain where my money came from. My training in the special unit had taught me to be careful. The smart move was to spread my purchases across multiple cooperatives so nobody would notice how much I was buying. With the Spirit Spring space, I could carry any amount. Lingy came back looking sheepish. She'd spent the entire yuan. She'd bought the hair clip and blown through everything. She asked me not to tell her mom, offering me her share of the candies as a bribe. I laughed and promised her secret was safe. She beamed and thanked me sweetly, fiddling happily with her new clip as we walked on. I tucked the sugar ration ticket into my Spirit Spring space. If I remembered correctly, sugar tickets would become unnecessary soon. You still wouldn't need a ticket to buy regular candy, but popular brands like White Rabbit would sell out fast and be hard to get. As I looked around at the old buildings, I thought about how in just a few years, reform and opening up would transform the capital and many of these structures would become history. Then something caught my eye. A big, burly man was hurrying down the street carrying a little girl. A woman walked beside him, and both of them kept glancing around nervously, their pace quick and tense. Something was wrong. These two were definitely up to no good. I hesitated. I'd come to this era wanting a peaceful life, surrounded by family who loved me. But my sense of justice wouldn't let me walk away. I cursed myself quietly. This damn conscience of mine. I told Lingy to wait where she was, and that I'd be right back. She looked confused, so I explained quickly. I thought those two people might be child traffickers. Her face went pale, and she nodded. As I hurried after them, she made a decision of her own and ran toward the East City police station. The man and woman ducked into an alley and picked up speed. I followed at a distance, not wanting to alert them. They stopped at a courtyard and looked around carefully before knocking. 3 long knocks, 1 short. A voice from inside called out the first line of a classical poem, and the big man answered with a twisted version. A password system. The door opened, revealing another tough-looking man in his 20s, and they went inside. I crept closer and used my Spirit Spring space's sensing ability to scan the area. There were 10 people inside the biggest room. 4 children of different ages lying unconscious on the floor, all wearing decent clothes, not from poor families. The remaining 6 were all men. The woman from the street was actually the shortest of the bunch wearing a wig. I hadn't been close enough to tell before. I overheard their conversation. The one called Brother Foam was the leader. The small one was nervous, worried they'd be executed if caught. A man named Bai Lausen laughed it off. 1,000 yuan per child. For children meant 4,000 total, enough for all 6 of them to live well. For a year or 2. Brother Foam said they were just hired hands carrying out someone else's orders, and whatever happened to the kids after the handoff wasn't their problem. So they'd been hired by someone to kidnap these specific children. 1,000 yuan per child was an enormous sum. Whoever was behind this had serious money and serious motives. I couldn't walk away. Thanks to the Spirit Spring water, my body had changed dramatically over the past few days. I looked skinny, but I could lift 200 jin with one hand. And I still had all my combat training from my previous life, refined, improved fighting techniques. The only thing I needed to worry about was whether any of them had guns. One man came outside to get water from the well. The moment he lowered his bucket, I moved in behind him and chopped the back of his neck. His eyes rolled white, and he collapsed. I caught him and dragged his body out of sight. A minute later, someone inside grumbled about how long the first guy was taking, and 2 more came out. One big, one the small fake woman. As they approached the well, I stepped out and cracked the big one over the head with a stick. He dropped instantly. I swung a hand chop at the small one's neck, but he shifted just enough that it didn't fully connect. He shouted, asking who I was, and I answered with another swing that knocked him out cold. His yell alerted the last 3. They burst out of the room, but I was already moving. I closed the distance to Brother Foam and drove a kick into his chest. He screamed and flew backward into another man, and both crashed to the ground. That left Bai Lausan. His eyes flashed with murderous intent. He reached to his waist, pulled out a knife, and lunged straight at my chest. I stayed calm as Bai Lausan's knife came at my chest. I sidestepped, swung the wooden stick, and cracked it across his knife hand. Bones snapped. He screamed, and the blade hit the ground. I kicked him hard in the waist. He flew several meters and slammed his head against the edge of the well, out cold. Brother Fong and the last man had gotten back on their feet. Seeing what happened to Bai Lao San, their eyes widened with fear. Brother Fong didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the room where the children were. The other man pulled a knife and charged at me, screaming that he'd kill me. I hurled my stick at Brother Fong. It smashed into his foot, and he crashed to the ground, howling in pain. Then I turned, grabbed the other man's wrist, and twisted downward. He shrieked and dropped his knife. I punched him in the stomach several times until he crumpled, completely finished. I walked over to Brother Fong, who was trying to crawl up with a knife in his hand. I was relieved it was a knife and not a gun, not because I feared for myself, but because a desperate man with a gun might hurt the unconscious children. I knocked him out in 3 quick strikes, then went back and silenced the last groaning one too. A startled cry came from inside the room. I rushed in and found all 4 children awake, 2 boys and 2 girls. The oldest was a girl around 10, with delicate features that would make her a beauty when she grew up. The other 3 were about 6 or 7. They all stared at me with frightened eyes, backing away. I smiled and told them not to be scared. I wasn't a bad guy, and all the bad guys were knocked out. The oldest girl thanked me for saving them. The others relaxed a little. Then came loud banging on the front gate and a shout. "Open up, we're the police." I grinned, told the kids I'd go let them in, and ran to the gate. 4 officers rushed in with guns drawn, 2 of them pointing straight at me. Behind them stood Lingy, looking relieved to see me unhurt. The officers spotted the 6 unconscious men scattered around the courtyard, and their eyes went wide. One rushed into the room, then called out excitedly for his superior to come quickly. A man in his 40s, Officer Zhou Liang, hurried inside, then shouted for someone named Xiao Lu to go notify the station chief that all the missing persons had been found and to send backup. Zhou Liang told the young officer pointing a gun at me to lower it. I wasn't a criminal. He came over and asked if I'd really taken down all 6 men by myself. He called me Comrade Xiao Lu, so Lingy must have told them my name. I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. A skinny teenager dropping 6 grown men was hard to believe, but he was polite about it. He said I should call him Uncle Zhou and asked me to come to the East City Station to help with the investigation. I agreed. Having an uncle in the police force wasn't a bad thing. Lingy came up to me, half scared and half proud. She said I'd terrified her, but look how clever she'd been, running straight to the police station. I gave her a genuine thumbs up and told her she was brave and smart. For a 12-year-old to think that clearly under pressure showed real character and good parenting. She held her chin high like a proud peacock. Minutes later, heavy footsteps announced a new arrival. A man in his 50s led over a dozen officers into the courtyard. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but authority radiated from him. Zhou Liang snapped to attention and addressed him as chief. The man asked urgently where the children were. Zhou Liang pointed to the room and confirmed all 4 had been identified. The chief rushed inside, then emerged moments later with the 4 children and hurried them out through the gate. I narrowed my eyes. These kids clearly had backgrounds even more important than I'd guessed. But it wasn't my concern. I'd simply done what needed to be done. As the station chief led the children away, the oldest girl turned back and smiled at me, thanking me for saving them. The other 3 looked at me with grateful eyes. The chief glanced at me too, but said nothing, then left with the children separately from everyone else. After that, things were straightforward. Bai Lao San, whose hand I'd broken, was sent to the hospital. The other 5 were handcuffed and hauled away. Lingy and I had to go to the East City Police Station to give statements. It was a sizable station with over 30 officers. They put us in a room to wait. Officer Zhou Liang came in and asked me to walk through everything in detail. Meanwhile, the suspects were being interrogated, and their confessions matched my account perfectly. Zhou Liang asked me to leave my address, both Uncle Li's place in the city and Lupang village back home, in case they needed to follow up. He'd started calling me Comrade Lu instead of Comrade Xiao Lu, which felt like a small upgrade. It was past noon when we finally left the station and hurried home. As we entered the courtyard, Uncle Li and Dad were just wheeling out the bicycle to come look for us. They both sighed with relief when they saw us. Uncle Li frowned and asked where we'd been. Lingy said we should go inside first. Too many neighbors were watching. Everyone was starving, so we sat down to eat. Aunt had laid out an incredible spread: my wild chicken and fish, the mountain rat, plus braised pork belly, tofu, and 2 vegetable dishes. Uncle brought out a bottle of erguo too, and Aunt gave each of us kids a bottle of Arctic Ocean soda, a glass bottle drink that required a ration ticket. In my previous life, my father used to talk about this soda as a beloved memory of his generation. Lingy couldn't contain herself and immediately started telling the whole story, giving the most detailed account of how she'd cleverly run to the police station. When Uncle, Dad, and Aunt heard that I'd knocked out 6 men by myself, they were stunned. But instead of praise, Uncle turned serious. He told me that while I'd done a good thing, I hadn't done it smartly. Once I'd found where they were hiding, my first move should have been to call the police, not charge in alone. He quoted the old saying about a wise man not standing beneath a crumbling wall. He reminded me I was the only male heir in the entire Liu family. If something happened to me, my whole family would be devastated. He wasn't saying I shouldn't help people, just that I needed to use my head. He was right, and I knew it. Those men could have had guns. I'd been reckless. I told him honestly that I'd acted on impulse without thinking it through, and promised that next time I'd contact the police first instead of playing hero. Uncle's expression softened. He said he was glad I understood, and that I'd really grown up. He told me to enjoy my stay, and said he'd keep an eye out for job opportunities in the city for me. Dad didn't say a word, just smiled and nodded at me. He was worried too, but he respected that I was getting older and had my own mind. Lingy was upset. She'd expected her dad to shower me with praise, not criticism, and nobody had even acknowledged her contribution. She sat there sulking quietly. Aunt sensed the awkward mood and stepped in. She piled a big piece of braised pork into my bowl, telling me to eat more and put some meat on my skinny frame. It was delicious, rich, but not greasy. Then she placed a chicken leg in Lingy's bowl and called her, my brave daughter who did her part today. Lingy's face lit up instantly. Everyone laughed, and just like that, the table was warm and happy again. Meanwhile, at the City Public Security Bureau, Deputy Director Nia Chifei finally smiled after receiving a phone call. His own daughter had gone missing that morning and was found by noon. 2 other children, belonging to district bureau directors, had been missing for 2 days. The entire city had been on high alert, monitoring train stations and key locations, with no progress until the East City Station reported the rescue. This wasn't an ordinary case. It was a planned operation targeting children of important people in the capital's public security system. Through interrogation, they learned the 6 men were hired hands. The people who hired them had also been caught, but they weren't the real masterminds either. Someone had offered 3,000 yuan per child, and the middlemen subcontracted the job at 1,000 per child, pocketing 8,000 for doing nothing. The trail went cold there. Nobody knew who was really behind it. Nie Chi-fei ordered his secretary to run a thorough background check on me, from the day I was born to the present. He had to be cautious. If I'd been planted by someone to win favor through this rescue, the scheme could be far-reaching. At his level, every unknown factor had to be investigated. I knew nothing about any of this. After lunch, I told Dad and Uncle I wanted to explore the city. Dad walked me out and secretly pressed 5 yuan into my hand, telling me to buy whatever I wanted but not to waste it. I almost refused. I had 100 yuan already, but realized his money would serve as a cover story for purchases, so I took it. This time I went alone, without Lingy. I found a different supply cooperative and started buying everything that didn't require ration tickets: salt, soy sauce, vinegar, yellow paste, matches, soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, fruit hard candies, and several packs of Xiangshan cigarettes for Grandpa. I filled a big bag for just 11 yuan. I was careful not to buy too much of anything at one store to avoid suspicion. I ducked into an empty alley and swept everything into my Spirit Spring space. The moment I stepped back out, a man in a cap blocked my path and whispered, asking if I needed ration tickets. My eyes lit up. He led me into the alley and introduced himself as Old Liu. He laid out his inventory and prices. Coarse grain tickets at 10 fun per jean, fine grain at 20 fun, national grain tickets at 35 fun, cloth tickets at 40 fun per chi, oil tickets at 80 fun per jean, meat tickets at 40 fun per jean, egg tickets at 45 fun, sugar tickets at 50 fun. He also had industrial coupons, bicycle and watch tickets, though those were pricier. I asked about cigarette tickets, liquor tickets, bicycle tickets, and white rabbit candy tickets. Top grade cigarette tickets were 20 yuan for a whole carton. Second grade, 8 yuan. Top grade liquor tickets, good for one bottle of Mao Tai, were 14 yuan. Second grade were 5. Bicycle tickets cost 100 yuan each. White rabbit candy tickets were 2 yuan 50 for 1 jean. I calculated carefully and bought 10 jean of fine grain tickets, 3 jean of meat tickets, 10 jean of oil tickets, 2 jean of sugar tickets, 3 jean of white rabbit candy tickets, 10 chi of cloth tickets, 2 second grade liquor tickets, and 1 top grade cigarette ticket. About 30 yuan total. Old Lou was a smart businessman. He'd noticed me hauling a big bag out of the cooperative and figured I'd need tickets too. He threw in 5 jean of coarse grain tickets as a gift and told me to come find him whenever I needed more. I liked his style and made a mental note for next time. With all those tickets in hand, I hit 2 more cooperatives and spent every last fun. When I was done, I had 3 mao left, including Dad's 5 yuan. The leftover tickets went into the Spirit Spring Space warehouse. Over 100 yuan gone in one afternoon. If Mom and Dad ever found out, they'd call me the biggest spendthrift in history. But I'd gotten everything I needed, and now I had a believable excuse for bringing home all these supplies. I'd been to the city, after all. I headed back to Uncle's place with no money and no desire to keep shopping. The courtyard women stared at me curiously as I walked past, whispering among themselves. I ignored them. This trip had been a complete success. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw Uncle holding a fishing rod, about to head out. Uncle was heading out with a fishing rod. He invited me to join him at a park nearby with a big lake full of fish, though he warned they were hard to catch. My eyes lit up. I'd just spent all my money, and here was a chance to make some. Plus, I had hundreds of fish in my Spirit Spring space with no good excuse to bring them out. Today wouldn't be my turn to shine, though. I couldn't upstage Uncle. But tomorrow when he went to work, I could borrow his gear. Aunt came out and destroyed whatever dignity Uncle had left. She said that out of every 10 fishing trips, he came home empty-handed 9 times. The one time he brought back a fish, he'd actually traded ration tickets for it and lied about catching it. She was about to reveal his nickname when Uncle cut her off, face dark, complaining she was humiliating him in front of his nephew. I made it worse by asking Aunt to tell me the nickname secretly later. Uncle kicked me in the backside and laughed, calling me a little monkey. Then he got serious. Dad had told him about my big catch yesterday, and he needed me to bail him out if he couldn't catch anything today. He couldn't afford to lose face in front of Aunt. I promised I'd help. Out in the courtyard, the neighborhood women pounced immediately. One asked if he'd come home empty again. Another offered meat tickets in exchange if he actually caught something. A third joked that he'd brought his nephew as reinforcement and offered to lend extra buckets. Uncle's face went darker with each comment. His reputation as a fisherman who never caught fish was deeply established. I bit back my laughter. In the modern era, real fishing enthusiasts would have disowned him. He wasn't even qualified to be called one of them. Uncle fired back that they should have their meat tickets ready, then marched off without another word. I followed quietly with the bucket. After about 20 minutes, we reached the park. The lake was large, with plenty of people fishing along the banks. An old man recognized Uncle and offered him a spot nearby. Uncle introduced him as Elder Yang, a level 8 fitter at Red Star Steel Rolling Mill. I was impressed. A level 8 technician was the absolute ceiling of skilled labor, earning about 110 yuan a month. My dad's future salary after becoming permanent wouldn't match a third of that. Uncle introduced me as a fishing expert. Elder Yang looked me over with obvious doubt. I was just a skinny 15-year-old. He asked my age politely, then said nothing more. He clearly didn't believe it. I sat behind them and closed my eyes, using my Spirit Spring Space's sensing power to scan the lake. My range had grown since yesterday. I could now reach about 7 meters out. The lake had plenty of fish, some enormous, 10, even 20 jean. But they swam right past the hooks without biting. Only tiny fish nibbled at the bait from all sides, stealing it without getting caught. Now I understood the problem. I quietly grabbed some of Uncle's bait, mixed in Spirit Spring water, and kept it separate for my own use later. I noticed Uncle hadn't brought me to Elder Yang randomly. There seemed to be some purpose behind it, though I couldn't tell what yet. I stood behind them for a full hour without saying a word. Elder Yang managed to pull up 1/2 jean fish and was beaming. Uncle caught absolutely nothing. As the sun started sinking, Uncle gave up. He reeled in his line and waved me over, telling me it was my turn. He said his own skills were useless and I had to save his honor. He couldn't go home to those courtyard women and aunt with an empty bucket. He went off to relieve himself. I grinned and sat down. Finally, my moment had arrived. There was less than 2 hours until dark, minus the half-hour walk home. That gave me just over an hour of fishing time. Not long, but more than enough. Uncle rushed off to relieve himself, leaving me alone with Elder Yang. The old man looked at me with barely concealed doubt. I just smiled to myself. Wait and see. I took out the bait I'd mixed with spirit spring water, put it on the hook, and cast the line casually. Elder Yang immediately started lecturing me about how casting was an art form and I was doing it all wrong. But mid-sentence, he went silent. My rod had bent sharply downward. I wrestled with the fish and hauled out a massive grass carp. Someone nearby yelled that it had to be over 10 jin. Elder Yang was stunned. He'd been fishing here for ages and never caught anything this big. He muttered to himself that it was just dumb luck. A crowd gathered as I pulled the fish ashore. Everyone was impressed and jealous. They said I'd hit the jackpot and a fish this size could feed a family for days. What they didn't know was that I'd already quietly pulled 7 or 8 similar fish into my spirit spring space. I put the big one in the bucket and secretly added a few drops of spirit spring water to keep it alive. The fish filled half the bucket with its tail sticking out. Elder Yang eyed it sourly. I turned to him innocently and asked what he'd been about to teach me. He coughed to hide his embarrassment, then puffed himself up again. He said luck alone wouldn't do. You had to prepare a nest to attract fish, and the hook needed to be cast as far out as possible. My cast had been too close, and I definitely wouldn't. He choked on his words. My rod had dipped again, bending even deeper than before. His face went red. He kept telling himself it was just another fluke. The crowd rushed back over. I dragged up a carp weighing 16 or 17 jin. People couldn't believe it. Some said the fish must have become a spirit. They begged me to share my secret. I kept a straight face and pointed at Elder Yang, saying it was all thanks to his expert guidance, and they should ask him for tips. He'd be happy to teach everyone. His face cycled through every shade of red and white. Everyone here knew each other. He couldn't bluff these regulars the way he might fool strangers. They ignored my deflection and stared hungrily at my bait, though they were too polite to ask for some. I filled the bucket almost completely with the big carp. Then, while preparing fresh bait, I cheerfully told Elder Yang I'd follow his advice this time. Cast farther and use a nest. I scattered some of Uncle's bait into the distance, then turned back to him like an obedient student. He forced a stiff smile and kept going, saying preparation was the first step and making a nest didn't guarantee. He went mute for the 3rd time. The instant my hook hit the water, a fish bit. Elder Yang glared at the lake as another huge fish broke the surface, at least 7 or 8 jin. His face twisted through an incredible range of expressions. Without a word, he packed up his gear and fled. 3 times he'd tried to lecture me. 3 times reality had slapped him in the face. His dignity was in shreds. Uncle Lee finally came back from the toilet and saw a crowd gathered where he'd been fishing. His first panicked thought was that I'd fallen into the lake. He stumbled forward, heart racing, and started pushing through the bodies, begging people to make way. Uncle pushed through the crowd and froze. He'd only been gone a few minutes, and the bucket was overflowing. 2 huge fish inside, totaling around 30 jin, plus another 8 or 9 jin fish flopping on the ground beside it. His voice was shaking when he asked if I'd caught all of these. I grinned and told him my fishing skills were decent. Then I cast the line again. The hook barely touched the water before another fish bit. This one was smaller, 3 or 4 jin, pulled in quickly. I kept going, one cast after another, 10 fish in a row. The biggest was around 10 jin, the smallest 2 or 3. The people watching were green with envy. Uncle's eyes were bulging. This wasn't fishing, this was scooping. We had over 100 jin of fish piled up when a man pushed through the crowd. He introduced himself as Li Huaid, a purchasing agent for the Beijing television factory. He said we obviously couldn't eat all this fish, and he wanted to buy it for his factory's cafeteria. He assured us that selling to a state factory wasn't speculation or black market dealing, so it was perfectly legal. I recognized the factory name immediately. The Beijing television factory was founded this very year, 1973, growing out of the old Beijing radio manufacturing plant. Brand new and trying to keep its workers well fed. I didn't answer right away. I looked at Uncle to let him handle negotiations. Uncle checked the man's work ID to verify his identity, then asked me if I was willing to sell. I told Uncle to negotiate the price, but said I'd like to be paid partly in ration tickets. Uncle worked out a deal, 1 yuan per jean, about 25 fun above market price, which was fair since buying fish at the market required fish tickets anyway. While they talked, I kept fishing. By the time Li Huai came back with a vehicle, I'd pulled in even more. The total haul exceeded 200 jean. Everything went on the truck, and the final payout was 150 yuan in cash plus over 60 yuan worth of various ration tickets. More than 200 yuan total for one afternoon. That was nearly half a year's wages for most workers. I kept 3 fish in the bucket, about 3 jean each, to bring home. Couldn't have the courtyard women thinking Uncle came back empty-handed again. Li Huai asked if I'd come back tomorrow. He said he'd buy as much as I could catch. I glanced at Uncle, who smiled and said of course I'd be back. Li Huai asked what kind of tickets I wanted. I told him I needed a bicycle ticket and a radio ticket. The bicycle was for Dad. Riding home would take 20 minutes instead of walking over an hour. The radio was for Grandpa and Grandma, who were too lonely out in the village. A radio would give them company. Li Huai laughed and said those were big-ticket items, but he'd bring them tomorrow. He told me to arrive early since he'd be there around 10. He handed me a slip of paper with his office phone number and told me to call any time I had goods to sell. He'd always give a fair price. The factory had just opened and the director had ordered that the cafeteria couldn't serve bad food. Finding enough meat was Li Huai's biggest headache, so my fish were a godsend. On the walk home, Uncle was practically glowing. He was amazed. His nephew had earned over 200 yuan in a single afternoon, more than 3 months of his own 63 yuan salary. He was already imagining the look on Dad's face when he found out. I was happy too. I'd burned through 100 yuan that morning and already made it all back, and then some. Money really did need to be spent before it could come back. Uncle had handed me all the cash and tickets, but I couldn't keep everything. I told him we'd split it 50-50. That was only fair. Taking it all would have made me less than human. Uncle refused to take any money. He said the fish were all mine, and splitting the earnings would make him look terrible if word got out. He told me not to mention the sale to anyone, especially not Aunt. She wasn't stingy, but she had a big mouth, and news would spread through the courtyard and beyond in no time. He asked me to tell Aunt that he'd caught the 3 fish in the bucket, so he could finally have some dignity at home. When I tried to insist, he cut me off. He and Aunt both had jobs and weren't short on money. I was the one who needed it. He'd noticed I asked for a bicycle ticket and guessed it was for Dad, which made him happy. Then his expression turned sad for a moment as he mentioned my eldest uncle, Li Jianfei. Before being sent to the Northwest, Uncle Jianfei had made Uncle Li promise to take care of our family. The memories from the original body filled in the rest. 2 years ago, my eldest uncle had been falsely accused and denounced. His whole family was sent away for reform. To protect his siblings, he'd publicly cut ties with them and published a notice in the newspaper severing all family connections. Even so, Uncle Li was affected. He'd been demoted from deputy factory director to ordinary worker. Things had gotten somewhat better since then. I knew from history that people like my eldest uncle would eventually be cleared and allowed to return to the capital, but I kept that to myself. I let it go. 100-some yuan wasn't worth arguing about. I'd find ways to help Uncle's family later. Back at the courtyard, the place was lively. A dozen or so people were milling about. The husbands had come home from work. A balding man in his 50s named Huang Fugue offered Uncle a Dakiaman cigarette and greeted him. Another man, Li Taiju, spotted the 3 big fish in my bucket and shouted in disbelief that Uncle had actually caught something. Everyone swarmed around us. The children's eyes went wide. A chubby 7-year-old boy named Zhang Ergu started yelling that he wanted fish, drool running down his chin. His father Zhang Deshang smacked him on the head and told him to shut up. The boy's mother, Mrs. Zhang, rushed over and screamed at her husband, calling him useless for hitting his own son just because the kid wanted fish. Her words stung, but Zhang Deshang swallowed his anger and puffed harder on his cigarette. I watched quietly. I caught the greed in Mrs. Zhang's eyes. She'd picked that fight on purpose, hoping to guilt Uncle into sharing. Her gaze kept sliding to the fish in the bucket. Little Ergu, sensing his mother's support, wailed even louder about wanting fish. I smiled to myself and waited to see how Uncle would handle this. Uncle finished his cigarette calmly, then turned to Mrs. Zhang with a pleasant smile. He reminded her that at noon she'd offered to trade meat tickets for fish. Well, here was the fish. Urgu was crying for it, so why not bring out those meat tickets? Her face fell instantly. She had said that, but she'd never meant it seriously. Urgu heard, meat tickets for fish, and stopped crying immediately, tugging at his mother to go get the tickets. Mrs. Zhang's expression soured completely. She smacked Urgu's backside several times, scolding him for only thinking about eating, then dragged the screaming boy back to their room. Uncle wasn't done. He turned to Mrs. Huang and Mrs. Li with the same sweet smile. They'd both asked him at noon to save them a fish. Here they were, ready for trade. Meat tickets for fish, just like they'd said. Their husbands turned to glare at them, anger flickering in their eyes. Fish was nice, but pork was far more satisfying, especially fatty pork. Nobody's wife had any business trading precious meat tickets for fish without permission. I almost laughed. Uncle had been mocked by these women for years over his fishing failures, and today he'd finally gotten his revenge, beautifully. Mrs. Huang and Mrs. Li backpedaled instantly. One said she'd just been joking, the other claimed she was only making conversation. Their husbands glared at them, and both women shrank back. Huang Fugui quickly changed the subject, complimenting me on my looks, and Li Taiju called me Uncle's lucky charm. A god of wealth, who'd brought fish the moment he showed up. Uncle puffed up with pride, then introduced me to the three men. I greeted them politely, and they all seemed to like me. Lingy ran out and called us in for dinner. Uncle said goodbye to the neighbors with a beaming smile. Today had been his finest hour. On the way to their door at the back of the courtyard, we passed another family's entrance. A thin little girl of 7 or 8 stood outside and sweetly greeted Uncle. He asked about her grandparents, and she said Grandma was cooking and Grandpa was weaving bamboo baskets. Her eyes kept drifting to the fish in my bucket. An old man of about 60 came out. Uncle grabbed a fish from the bucket and handed it to him, telling him to feed his granddaughter. She was too skinny. The old man, Elder Dong, refused repeatedly, saying they could manage and Uncle should keep the fish. Uncle insisted, saying he didn't want it for free. He needed a vegetable basket, and Elder Dong could weave him one sometime. The old man hesitated just long enough for Uncle to press the fish into his hands and hurry away. I heard Elder Dong tell little Dong Jing to remember Uncle Li's kindness. He said he and Grandma were too old to repay it, and she must never forget this when she grew up. The girl nodded seriously and promised. I asked Uncle quietly about the Dong family. He sighed. Elder Dong had 2 sons. One died 20 years ago on the Korean battlefield. The other had been a university professor, but was labeled a class enemy and sent to the Northwest with his wife. Both died of illness there. Little Dong Jing had been raised by her grandparents ever since. The old couple survived on Grandpa's basket weaving and Grandma's shoe sole stitching. Without the girl to live for, they'd have given up long ago. Uncle said he'd been helping them regularly ever since moving in, even though his own situation had only started improving this year. I told Uncle I wanted to learn from him, and I meant it from the bottom of my heart. He was stuck in mud himself, yet still reached out to pull others up. That was true goodness. Lingy chimed in that she wanted to be like her dad too. Now she understood why he always helped the Dong family, and she admired him deeply. Uncle laughed, happier than I'd ever seen him. Aunt was waiting at the door. The moment Uncle spotted her, he started showing off, holding up the fish and asking if she'd noticed how impressive he was, catching a 3-gene carp. Aunt laughed and played along, praising her mighty husband. She was a smart woman. She probably knew the fish had something to do with me, but she understood that a man needed his pride, and she gave it to him without hesitation. Dad wasn't joining us for dinner. He'd gone to the temporary housing the factory had arranged for him. It was just a place to sleep, not a permanent home. Maybe once he became a full-time worker, he'd have a chance at getting assigned a real apartment. Over dinner, Uncle launched into a dramatic retelling of his fishing conquest, describing every detail with great flair. I backed him up completely, saying I'd just stood there watching all afternoon and never even touched the rod. Aunt looked skeptical, but Lingy believed every word and kept praising her father. Uncle's pride swelled to its absolute peak. After dinner, Aunt handed me an apple, the first batch of the season from the supply cooperative, saved for her by her sister. My eyes lit up, but not for the fruit itself. I wanted the seeds. My Spirit Spring space had plenty of land, but almost no fruit tree seeds. Aunt glanced around to make sure Uncle wasn't nearby, then whispered, asking me to tell her the truth. Was it really me who caught those fish? She said Uncle's skill level couldn't possibly produce 3 big fish. My face must have given me away, because she laughed and said she didn't need me to answer. She'd let him show off for a few days, then take him fishing herself to reveal the truth. I silently mourned for Uncle's future humiliation. I ate the apple carefully, collecting all 9 seeds. In my room with the door locked, I entered the spirit spring space and planted them. Sprouts appeared instantly. The corn, mung beans, red beans, and potatoes were nearly ripe. The river now held 700 or 800 fish, the biggest over 20 gene and still growing. I stripped and soaked in the spring for about an hour. Black impurities oozed from my skin and washed away in the current. When I climbed out, my skin was as smooth as a baby's. I left the space and slept deeply. At dawn I went back in. The apple saplings were already as tall as me. I harvested all the mature crops and replanted everything, expanding the planted area dozens of times over. This batch would ripen by tomorrow night, and then I'd finally have real grain reserves. At the stone tablet, I pressed check-in. The reward stunned me. Master-level Sichuan cuisine skills from the future, automatically merging into my mind. Instantly, I felt a lifetime's worth of culinary knowledge pour into my brain. Techniques, recipes, seasonings, the works. I couldn't believe the system could give something like this. But thinking about it, this was worth more than 100 gene of pork. Sichuan cuisine had some of the greatest dishes in all of Chinese cooking, and now I had them all. I drank a big cup of spring water and headed out. Uncle and Aunt were already up and getting ready for work. Uncle pointed to the fishing rod on the table. It was mine for the day. Aunt told me she'd boiled 3 eggs, 2 for me, 1 for Lingy. She and Uncle would eat lunch at the factory and come home to cook dinner. She handed me another yuan for my midday meal. I tried to refuse, but Uncle insisted I take it, so I did. After they left, I went to a state-run restaurant and bought 10 meat buns, 2 mao each, with a decent amount of pork inside. I ate 5 before I felt full. Back at the courtyard, I ran into little Dong Jing. I held out 2 meat buns for her. She shook her head and refused, but she couldn't help swallowing. I put on a stern face and said firmly, "Take them." She was so startled she grabbed them immediately. I grinned and headed to Uncle's place. She ran inside, and I heard Elder Dong and his wife asking where the buns came from. Dong Jing told them the tall brother with the fish bucket had given them. Elder Dong recognized who she meant, Uncle Lee's nephew. Grandma Dong asked what they should do. Elder Dong sighed and told the girl to eat. Once someone gave a gift, they wouldn't take it back. He said Uncle Lee's whole family were good people, and they owed them more and more. But Dong Jing wouldn't eat alone. She held 1 bun up to her grandmother, refusing to take a bite until they shared. Elder Dong told his wife to just eat. Otherwise, the girl would starve herself out of stubbornness. The old woman took the bun and looked at her granddaughter with tender eyes. These 2 old people were fighting to stay alive because without them, the little girl would have no home. Once Dong Jing saw her grandparents eating, she finally smiled and sat down to enjoy her share. The look on her face said it all. I went back inside and ate 2 boiled eggs. This body desperately needed nutrition. Lingy was still asleep, so I grabbed the fishing rod and bucket and headed out. The 3 courtyard wives were in the yard, but didn't dare crack any jokes this time. Their husbands had given them an earful last night, and it showed. When I reached yesterday's fishing spot, I spotted a familiar figure, Elder Yang, already set up in the exact place I'd been fishing. I grinned. The old man must have figured his problem yesterday was the location, not his skill. I walked over cheerfully and greeted him. His face twisted with embarrassment. Just as I'd guessed, he'd thought about it all night, called in sick from work, and arrived at dawn. He'd been fishing for over an hour without catching a single thing, not even a small one. I sat down next to him and said with my most innocent smile that I'd love to fish beside him again so he could give me more pointers. His face went completely dark. I could practically hear him cursing me inside his head. He knew I was there to watch him suffer, but he couldn't say it out loud. He made his escape immediately, claiming he suddenly had to go to work and couldn't stay to teach me today. He packed his gear at record speed and practically ran away. For an old man, he moved fast. I laughed out loud watching him go. With hardly anyone around, just a few elderly fishermen in the distance, I got to work. I found a natural dip in the ground near the lake, filled it with water using a few bucket trips, blocked the lakeside with a big rock, and added a few drops of spirit spring water. Now I had an extra holding pond, so I wouldn't run out of space. In under 30 minutes, I'd pulled over 100 gene of fish from the lake. The old men in the distance noticed and started heading my way. Before they arrived, I quickly pulled a dozen or so fish from my spirit spring space. Each one over 15 gene, the biggest easily past 25. I put them all in the pond, making it look impressively full. When the crowd gathered, their jaws dropped. They couldn't believe the size and quantity. One old man asked if I was the same person who'd caught over 200 gene yesterday. Word had already spread. I confirmed it casually while casting my line again. Another fish bit immediately, another huge one, drawing more gasps. Someone wondered aloud if all the fish in the lake had gathered in this one spot. That sent the other fishermen scrambling back to grab their own gear, leaving me alone to keep pulling fish at full speed. By the time Li Huai arrived, the holding pond had completely disappeared under fish. He'd been worried on the way over that maybe yesterday was a fluke. Last night, his factory director had praised him for the fish delivery, and he'd rashly promised to bring back 500 gene today. The director had given him the bicycle ticket and radio ticket as a show of faith. Li Huai told me all this honestly. He said he'd come early because he couldn't sit still with worry. I liked his straightforwardness. He was competing for the position of purchasing department chief at the newly established Beijing television factory. There were 6 buyers total, and whoever brought in the most supplies within a month would get the job. My fish were giving him a serious edge. I told him to relax and go get the truck. 500 gene today, guaranteed, probably more. He should come back at 10, and we'd weigh everything. His face broke into a huge grin. He said he'd even brought 2 helpers today, and he'd send them over with the loading equipment right away. He walked off with a spring in his step. While nobody was watching, I pulled dozens of large fish from my spirit spring space and filled the holding pond completely, wall-to-wall fish. Then I sprinkled spirit spring water into the lake, dipped my rod in, and hundreds of fish swarmed over. I swept them into the space as fast as I could. They weren't huge yet, but a few days in the spirit spring would fix that. The old fisherman in the distance saw a fish leaping out of the water near me and came running, convinced the fish had all gathered in my spot. When Li Huai arrived with 2 helpers, we loaded and weighed everything, 789 gene. At 1 yuan per gene, that came to 789 yuan. After subtracting the bicycle ticket at 100 yuan and the radio ticket at 45, plus another 144 yuan in miscellaneous tickets I traded for, I walked away with 500 yuan cash. Li Huai handled the payment discreetly so the onlookers didn't see. In one morning, I'd earned what many workers made in several years. If Dad found out, he'd be speechless. Then Li Huai pulled me aside with an even bigger offer. He said if I could supply 500 gene of real meat, not fish, but pork, wild boar, goat, deer, anything like that, he could get me a permanent worker position at the Beijing television factory. The meat would still be paid for at market price. The job was a bonus. Starting salary was 35 yuan a month, rising to 40 after 1 year. My eyes lit up instantly. I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about Mom. With Dad working in the city and Mom stuck in the village, they were living apart. If I could get Mom a factory job too, the whole family could eventually be together. I asked about requirements. Li Huai said you just couldn't be over 50. Either gender was fine, and some positions didn't require any education. Just show up and do what you're told. That was perfect for Mom. I thanked him and said I'd figure something out in the next couple of days. I gave him Uncle's address so he could find me. After he left, I caught 6 more fish with my remaining bait, one about 5 gene, the rest around 2, and headed home. The courtyard women stared at my haul with envy, but didn't dare say anything since they didn't know me well. I didn't see little Dong Jing, so I couldn't give her a fish this time. Lingy screamed when she saw my bucket. She said her dad had bragged all night about 3 fish, and I'd just brought back 6, a crushing victory. I offered to take her to a state restaurant for lunch, but she'd already started cooking corn porridge and had 2 meat buns left over. She said wasting food wasn't right, so we ate at home. After lunch, I went on a massive shopping spree across multiple supply cooperatives and burned through over 600 yuan in one round. I came back riding a brand new Phoenix bicycle. I'd also bought a radio, which was tucked safely in my spirit spring space. I was down to 3 yuan and some leftover tickets. Back to square one again. The courtyard wives' eyes nearly popped out when they saw the new bicycle. Mrs. Huang couldn't help asking what my family did and how old I was. I told her we were generations of poor farmers, and Dad's new factory job meant a long commute, so the family had pooled every last bit of savings to buy the bike. I said I was 15. The moment they heard, all our savings, their envy faded. A Phoenix bicycle with the ticket cost around 280 yuan, and most families here could manage that. They lost interest, and I walked away. That evening when Uncle and Aunt came home, the shiny bicycle surprised them too. Uncle figured out quickly that I must have caught more fish today, but Aunt was puzzled. She asked if Dad had told me to buy it. She knew our family wasn't well off, so where had the money come from? Uncle laughed at Aunt's questions and told her not to rush. He needed to go register the bicycle at the police station first. He suggested they each ride a bike to work tomorrow and deliver this one to Dad. At the station, since Dad wasn't there, the bicycle was registered under my name. The process was thorough. They checked the receipt against my household booklet, verified the steel stamp on the frame, issued a small license booklet with the owner's name, address, brand, model, and stamp number, then gave me a metal plate to mount on the rear fender. Only then was the bike legally mine. In this era, riding an unregistered bicycle was a serious offense. You could end up in prison. At dinner, Uncle finally couldn't hold back and asked how many fish I'd caught today. Aunt's eyes went wide when he mentioned 300 jin. I told them I'd exceeded that number, but had spent all the money, including buying a radio at the supply cooperative. I kept the exact figure vague because I'd bought so many other things that would be hard to explain. Uncle gave me a thumbs up. Then he explained everything to Aunt, how we'd met a buyer from the Beijing television factory yesterday, and how I'd earned the bicycle and radio through today's catch. Lingy stared at me with pure worship in her eyes, kicking herself for sleeping in. Uncle warned everyone to keep this secret. If word spread, it could bring me trouble. Aunt and Lingy both nodded seriously. That night, Aunt couldn't sleep. She whispered to Uncle, asking if she should introduce me to her older sister's daughter as a match. Uncle shut that down immediately. The Liu family elders would want a say in choosing my future wife, and besides, I was only 15. It was way too early. Aunt dropped the idea but told herself she had a strong feeling I'd become someone important. I knew nothing about the matchmaking talk. My mind was on 3 things I still needed to do in the city. First, get a hunting rifle. The hills back home were full of game waiting to be caught. Second, find the black market to sell the grain that would soon be pouring out of my spirit spring space. Corn, potatoes, red beans, mung beans. Third, visit the ghost market, the pre-dawn antique bazaar where valuable items were sold cheap. If I picked up the right things now, they'd be worth fortunes in the future. The first and third goals both required money, and I was down to a few yuan. I decided to find the black market first and make some cash. The next morning, I checked my spirit spring space. The crops weren't quite ready yet, but the apple and hazelnut trees had grown considerably. The hazelnuts were already 6 or 7 meters tall. I was startled to see over 10 rabbits hopping around the grassland. The pregnant doe I'd put in 2 days ago had delivered 10 babies, all already fist-sized and munching grass beside their mother. The wild chickens had laid 7 or 8 eggs and were sitting on them. By tonight, there'd be chicks. The river fish had grown noticeably bigger overnight. I pressed check-in at the stone tablet. Today's reward, 100 jin of beef sent to the warehouse. My eyes lit up. Beef stewed with potatoes would be incredible. I drank a big cup of spirit spring water and headed out. Uncle and Aunt had already left for work, with 3 boiled eggs in the pot as usual. I ate one and went exploring. Li Huai probably wouldn't need more fish for a day or 2, so I didn't bother going to the lake. I also hadn't yet gathered the 500 jin of meat needed to secure that factory job for Mom, but it was getting close. Today I had one goal: locate the black market and the ghost market. The ghost market typically ran from 3 or 4 in the morning until around 7, when the light came up and everyone scattered like phantoms. Buyers and sellers covered their faces so nobody could be recognized. The black market was different. It operated around the clock, but in hidden locations, managed by specific people, and you had to know where to look. I had no idea where either one was, so I spent the day wandering the streets, searching. I wandered around for a long time, but couldn't find the ghost market or the black market anywhere. Then I remembered old Lou, the ticket scalper. He'd know for sure. I found him at the same spot as before. We ducked into an alley, and I told him straight. I had goods to sell and needed to know where the black market was. Old Lou asked what I had. When I said a few hundred gene of corn and about 1,000 gene of fish, surprise flickered across his face. He thought for a moment, then said he knew the head of logistics at the Red Star textile factory, who handled purchasing. The fish could go there, though the price might be a bit lower than the black market. As for the corn, he said plenty of people needed grain right now and he could handle it himself. He just wanted to know my price. This guy was more connected than I'd thought. Then I lowered my voice and asked if he could help me find a hunting rifle. He studied me for a moment, then said I'd asked the right person. He had a friend with 2 good guns for sale, but they weren't cheap. He offered to take me there right away. Old Lou led me through winding alleys to a small courtyard. I could hear children crying inside. He knocked, and a deep voice asked who it was. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s, scarred face, thick beard, fierce-looking. His eyes swept past old Lou and landed on me with a frown. Old Lou whispered that I was here to buy a gun. The man, old Zhang, nodded and let us in, locking the door behind us. I scanned the place with my spirit spring sensing power and detected 5 children in one room, all wearing ragged clothes. Old Zhang walked ahead, limping badly on one leg. I felt something intense radiating from him, a killing aura, thick and unmistakable. In my previous life, working in the special unit had made me extremely sensitive to this. He'd killed people. Not 1 or 2, many. Old Lou whispered that old Zhang was a Korean War veteran who'd lost the use of his leg on the battlefield. That explained everything. I felt deep respect for him. He led us to a room, opened a wardrobe, and pulled out a wooden case. Inside was a rifle. AKM assault rifle. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. Old Zhang looked at me with approval. He hadn't expected me to recognize it. I knew this weapon intimately. It was a Soviet design, produced starting in 1959 as the replacement for the AK-47. 30-round magazine, 3.15 kilograms empty. I'd used one in my previous life. I never imagined I'd find one here. I asked if I could hold it. He nodded, noting there were no bullets inside. The moment I picked it up, that familiar feeling rushed back. I didn't try to hide how much I wanted it. I asked his price. Old Zhang took a deep breath. He didn't want money. He wanted grain. A fallen comrade had given him this rifle, and he'd planned to keep it forever, but his family was starving. On the open market it could fetch over 500 yuan, he said, but he'd accept enough food instead. He wasn't being greedy. In fact, a gun like this would only grow more valuable over time. It still had huge demand decades into the future. I thought it over and made him an offer. 100 gene of corn flour, 400 gene of raw corn, 50 gene of mung beans, 50 gene of red beans, 50 gene of pork, 50 gene of beef, plus 200 yuan in cash. If he preferred all grain instead of cash, he'd have to wait a few days while I sourced more. I couldn't give away all my reserves, and I'd need to sell more fish to come up with the 200 yuan. But it was a generous offer, and I knew it. Old Zhang's eyes brightened the instant I mentioned meat. He hadn't expected that. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him, and said, "Deal. With this much food, his family wouldn't have to worry about going hungry for the rest of the year. The raw corn could be dried and ground into flour, so it was just as good as finished grain to him." With old Zhang agreeing to the deal, the only thing I was still short on was the 200 yuan. I told him I needed 2 days to prepare everything and would deliver it all the night after tomorrow. I added one more condition. I needed him to get me at least 100 rounds of ammunition, and I'd throw in extra grain for that. He smiled and agreed. We set the time for 9 at night, when the neighbors would all be asleep and we could move things quietly. Walking away with old Lou, he kept glancing at me. Finally he asked, if I ever shot a deer while hunting, could I sell him the antler? He said he had a big use for it. I laughed and promised I would. Then I asked him to contact the logistics chief at Red Star Textile Factory about my 1,000 gene of fish. I told him it wasn't just mine. Our whole village had caught the fish together and they were being kept alive in a pond. If the factory wanted them, the villagers could deliver. Old Lou said it was no problem. Red Star Textile Factory had thousands of workers. 1,000 gene of fish wouldn't even last them 2 days. He went to make the call and came back quickly with good news. The logistics chief suggested we meet outside Dongzaimen Gate, near a wooded area, so we wouldn't have to haul the fish all the way into the city. He'd send a truck at 11 in the morning. I told old Lou it worked perfectly, and I'd call the village to have them start catching fish right away. Then old Lou lowered his voice and shared the locations I'd been searching for. The black market had spots near Dongdakyo outside Chuyang Gate, around Shikahai, and Hohai near Yinding Bridge, and the Lotus Market, and somewhere near Yongdingmen train station. The ghost market operated before dawn outside Dishingmen, along the city wall and the moat. He said that was all he knew and I'd have to investigate the details myself. I was thrilled. I told him I owed him one and would repay the favor properly later. I headed straight for Dongzaimen and walked out of the city. Sure enough, there was a dense grove of trees not far away. Inside, I found exactly what I needed, a large natural pit filled with rainwater like a ready-made pond. Perfect. I checked for anyone following me, found no one, and waited about half an hour until a truck appeared with Red Star Textile Factory painted on the side. 3 men got out, a driver, an ordinary worker in worn clothes, and a very fat man, at least 170 gene. In an era where everyone was thin, being that heavy meant you lived very well. This was Lu Yuanshan, the logistics chief. He looked at me suspiciously at first. I was alone, no villagers in sight. I told him they'd arrived earlier and the fish were already in a pond inside the woods. I asked him to bring the truck closer while I went to check that everything was ready. What I actually did was rush into the trees and, once out of sight, pull over 1,000 gene of fish from my spirit spring space and dump them into the pond. The water churned with fish leaping everywhere. When Lu Yuanshan reached the pond, his face lit up. He called me by my first name now. No more, Xiao Lu. He was clearly impressed by the size of the fish and asked how our village had caught such big ones. I played the part perfectly. I told him the village had carefully selected only the biggest fish, keeping the smaller ones in a separate pond to raise until year's end, when they'd be divided up so everyone could eat fish during the new year. I said the village was selling this batch to buy grain, because many families couldn't get enough to eat. I added that river fishing was dangerous work. People risked their lives doing it, but when you were hungry, you had no choice. Lu Yuanshan accepted my story without question. He told me that old Lu's real name was Lu Feilong, his own cousin. Since I was Feilong's friend, I was his friend too. He said to drop the formal title and just call him Uncle Lu. He handed me his office phone number and told me to call whenever I had something to sell. He promised he'd never shortchange me. He even said next time I visited his office, he'd give me 2 bottles of Maodai. The loading and weighing went smoothly. The total came to 1,137 gene. At 90 fun per gene, that was 1,023 yuan and 3 mao. An absolute fortune. He also threw in a stack of grain ration tickets. The price was below black market rates, and he probably knew it, but selling to a state factory was safe and hassle-free. He told me to deliver directly to the factory next time, then drove away with his truck full of fish. The moment the truck disappeared, I jumped in the air. 2 lifetimes of experience, and getting a windfall this size still made me giddy. With this money, I could improve my family's life dramatically. I headed back through Dongzaimen into the city. What I didn't know was that while I was out, 3 police officers had shown up at Uncle's courtyard, led by none other than Jean Gangong, the chief of the East City Police Station. His arrival sent the whole yard into a panic. In this era, police at your door almost always meant someone was in trouble. The neighborhood committee director, a woman named Director Wang, rushed over when she heard. Jean Gangong told her he was looking for someone named Lu Pingyan who'd left this address. It turned out I'd been under investigation for 2 days. The order had come from above, from Deputy Bureau Chief Nye Chi-fei, whose daughter I'd rescued, along with 2 district chiefs whose children I'd also saved. They'd had my entire background checked from birth to present. The investigation found nothing suspicious. My rescue of those children had been pure coincidence. All 3 senior officials had reached the same conclusion. A young man who could single-handedly take down 6 criminals deserved a place in the public security system. Since I wasn't yet 16, they decided to assign me to the East City Police Station. Jean Gangong had come personally to deliver the offer and bring gifts of thanks from all 3 officials. When they learned I wasn't home, Director Wang promised to tell me to visit the station when I returned. Jean Gangong left without fuss. The moment he was gone, the three courtyard wives, Mrs. Huang, Mrs. Li, and Mrs. Zhang, swarmed Director Wang in a frenzy. Mrs. Li declared their courtyard was a civilized, harmonious place, and this Liu fellow was just a temporary guest. Whatever crime he'd committed shouldn't reflect on them. Mrs. Huang demanded Director Wang protect their yard from troublemakers. Mrs. Zhang went furthest, suggesting they call the neighborhood patrol to arrest me the moment I appeared. Director Wang lost her patience and gave all three of them a tongue lashing. She pointed out that Chief Jean hadn't said I'd committed any crime. If I had, the paperwork would have already been sent to the neighborhood office. A station chief coming personally to find someone almost certainly meant something good, not bad. She told them to mind their own business and stop acting like busybodies. The three women stood there with their mouths hanging open, realizing they might have gotten it completely wrong. I had no idea what was happening back at the courtyard. I was busy exploring. I found the black market near Dongdaekyo outside Choyang Gate, but I'd arrived too late. It ran from about 6 in the morning to 10, and it was already over. No matter, at least I knew the location now. Then I went to check the ghost market area outside Dishengmen, along the old city wall and moat. Through some asking around, I confirmed exactly which alleys it operated in. Someone told me that lately the ghost market had been starting earlier, around 2 in the morning instead of 3 or 4. Along the way, I stopped at every supply cooperative I passed and bought more supplies, burning through all my remaining tickets and over 200 yuan in cash. I now had 806 yuan left, which I planned to hold on to for a while. Before entering the courtyard, I made sure nobody was watching and pulled out 2 pieces of pork belly from my spirit spring space. 1 2.5 jean. 1 a jean and a half. I also had a new bag I'd bought specifically for cover, so I could pull things from the space more easily in the future. In the yard, the three wives gave me strange looks. I thought it was odd, but didn't worry about it. I spotted little Dong Jing near her family's door and handed her a cloth bag, telling her to open it inside. She accepted it reflexively, then tried to give it back, but I was already gone. Inside the bag was the smaller piece of meat. She ran to her grandparents screaming. When Elder Dong opened the bag, his hands trembled so badly he dropped it. Grandma Dong picked it up, saw the meat, and dropped it too. Neither of them could remember the last time they'd seen a piece of meat this big. When Dong Jing explained the fish bucket brother had given it to her, Elder Dong immediately said they couldn't accept it. He told Grandma Dong to return it right away. She headed for Uncle's house with Dong Jing trailing behind. The old man sighed and went back to weaving his baskets. The moment I stepped through our door, Lingy grabbed me in a panic. She told me to run. The police had come looking for me and wanted to take me away. She'd been too anxious to read all day. I laughed and told her I hadn't broken any laws. She insisted. They'd come to the door, asked for me by name, and told me to report to the East City police station when I got back. In her mind, that could only mean one thing. I thought for a moment, and it clicked. This had to be about the children I'd rescued. I told Lingy to calm down. If I were actually a criminal, the police would have staked out the place and grabbed me on sight, not left a polite message. She let out a long breath when she realized I was right, then immediately forgot her worry when she noticed the big piece of pork belly on the table. I promised to make her red braised pork tonight and told her my cooking was something special. She was practically glowing with anticipation. Just then, someone knocked. I opened the door to find an elderly woman with half-white hair, Grandma Dong, with little Dong Jing behind her. Lingy came over and greeted them warmly. Grandma Dong got straight to the point. She said the meat was too valuable and they couldn't accept it. She'd come to return it personally. I looked at the cloth bag in her hands and understood immediately. She was giving back the pork. I'd expected the Dong family might refuse the meat. People in this era were proud and didn't accept charity. But I wasn't taking it back. I told Grandma Dong I'd bought an extra piece on purpose and pointed to the bigger one on our table as proof. Then I made her an offer. I needed a bamboo reclining chair, and I'd heard Elder Dong was an excellent craftsman. If he'd make me one, I'd pay him 30 jean of corn flour when it was done. The pork was just a deposit. I actually did want a chair for Grandpa and Grandma back in the village. Their old one was falling apart. Lingy caught my signal and jumped in, telling Grandma Dong this was a fair trade, not a handout. The old woman glanced at her thin granddaughter, hesitated, then finally agreed. Little Dong Jing's eyes brightened, and she waved goodbye with a smile. Back home, Elder Dong understood perfectly. He knew we were helping on purpose, but he accepted quietly. With that settled, I told Lingy I was heading to the East City Police Station. She insisted on coming along, still worried. In the courtyard, Mrs. Huang asked where we were going, and Lingy told her straight, the police station. Shortly after we left, Director Wang arrived to deliver the same message and was relieved to hear I'd already gone. At the station, I stood in Chief Jin Gongong's office. I recognized him from the day he'd taken those 4 children away. He studied me with sharp, commanding eyes that carried real pressure, but I kept my expression calm. He'd clearly read my file thoroughly. He knew my grandfather had been a soldier with commendations, and my eldest uncle had been a Korean War veteran who'd risen to division commander before being falsely accused and sent to the Northwest. My background was clean, a solid revolutionary pedigree. Jin Gangong told me the 4 children I'd rescued all belonged to parents in the public security system. The case had been far more serious than I'd realized. He said the families were deeply grateful and had arranged a reward, 200 yuan and a bicycle ticket, presented in an envelope. My eyes lit up. I'd just been thinking about getting myself a bicycle. Now I could buy one openly with a legitimate ticket. Then he asked if I'd ever considered becoming a police officer. The question caught me off guard. Memories of my previous life in the special unit flooded back. The missions, the betrayal, the death. I told him honestly that I'd never thought about it. I was just an ordinary person from the countryside who'd happened to be in the right place. Jin Gangong nodded, then laid it out directly. Because of the people I'd saved and the fighting ability I'd demonstrated, the higher-ups wanted me to join the public security system as a full officer. Normally I was too young, not yet 16, but they'd make an exception. He gave me 1 month to decide. If I wanted in, I should get a letter of introduction from my village and report to the East City Station. He handed me a second envelope containing my work authorization, issued personally by a district bureau chief, though he didn't tell me that. The position was grade 25 with a monthly salary of 30 yuan. He told me not to lose the document. When the time came, they'd only accept the paper, not the person. I took the envelope and couldn't help smiling bitterly. I'd come to this era wanting a quiet, peaceful life. Yet here was fate's machinery, pulling me right back onto the same track as my previous life. Being a police officer wasn't the same as working in a covert special unit, but it was still entering the system. I had 1 month to think about it. Lingy was waiting anxiously outside the station chief's office. When I came out, she rushed over asking if I was okay. My head was spinning. A free police officer position. That was a golden opportunity most people couldn't buy at any price. But after giving everything in my previous life and dying for it, part of me just wanted peace this time around. I handed Lingy an envelope, her reward for reporting to the police that day. She opened it and gasped. 50 yuan, 5 crisp bills. In her world, 1 yuan was already serious money. She was thrilled until she asked about mine. 200 yuan plus a bicycle ticket. Her 50 suddenly felt less impressive, but she quickly got happy for me instead, saying I deserved it for taking down 6 men alone. She asked if I wanted to buy a bicycle and practically dragged me to her Aunt Zhang Shimei supply cooperative before I could answer. I pushed aside my swirling thoughts about the police job. I had a month to decide, so there was no rush. At the cooperative, Aunt Zhang was surprised to see us again. Lingy blurted out the whole story before I could stop her. The rescue, the reward, the police station, everything. Aunt Zhang looked at me with new eyes. She said they'd just received 3 Phoenix bicycles and offered me the blue one, the prettiest of the batch. She also warned me to be more careful in the future. While we were finishing the purchase, a thin man in his 50s walked in. Every employee snapped to attention and greeted him as Director Xiong. He was the newly appointed manager of the cooperative. He noticed Aunt Zhang handing me the blue bicycle and asked if I was her relative. She explained the connection. I saw my chance. When I introduced myself, I deliberately called myself a hunter from Lupang village. Director Xiong's eyes lit up instantly. He told me to bring any game I caught to his cooperative, and he'd give me a fair price. That was exactly the response I'd been fishing for. I called him Uncle Xiong, and he immediately warmed up. He said since I'd given him such a respectful title, he couldn't be stingy in return. He disappeared into the back office and came out with a tin of premium West Lake Longjing tea. In this era, tea in a tin like that was the real deal. I tried to refuse, saying it was too valuable. He waved me off. He said a nephew's first meeting deserved a gift, and it was just tea. He pressed it firmly into my hands and told me to go register my new bicycle at the police station. I knew I now owed him a favor, and I'd repay it with future hunting catches. That was a relationship worth building. Lingy was in awe. She said I was incredible, good fighter, amazing fisherman, and apparently able to talk a supply cooperative director into giving away his best tea in under 2 minutes. She was already planning to tell her parents everything tonight, convinced they'd be just as amazed. We left with the new bicycle, the tea, and Lingy practically bouncing beside me. We went back to the police station and got the second bicycle registered. I now had 2 bikes under my name. I knew riding a new bicycle home to the village would cause a sensation. The only bike there was the village chief's old one. Back at the courtyard, the 3 wives went wide-eyed the moment they saw another brand-new bicycle. Mrs. Lee asked Lingy whose it was, all 3 of them staring hungrily. Lingy knew these women well enough. If she didn't explain now, they'd make up their own stories and spread them everywhere. So she told them plainly. The police had rewarded it to me for helping them with something important. That's why Chief Jean had come personally today, to thank me, not arrest me. Their faces flushed with embarrassment. They'd spent the whole day thinking I was a criminal. Mrs. Zhang mumbled a stiff congratulations and dragged Urga home. The other 2 found excuses and disappeared just as fast. I told Lingy they weren't bad people, just nosy. She said she knew, but if she hadn't set the record straight today, the whole neighborhood would be buzzing with wild rumors by morning. Her father didn't like her mother spending time with these women for exactly this reason. I smiled. This 12-year-old cousin of mine was sharp beyond her years. I silently mourned for her future husband. Inside, I started cooking. Red braised pork belly with dried beans. Corn pancakes stuck to the sides of the pot. The secret was frying the pork until golden brown to render out the excess fat, then adding cinnamon bark, garlic, ginger, a few Sichuan peppercorns, and rock sugar for color. My newly acquired master-level Sichuan cooking skills made every step instinctive. Lingy hovered nearby, swallowing constantly, telling me it smelled way better than her mom's version. I turned down the airflow to the coal stove, letting everything simmer on low heat for another half hour. The aroma drifted through the entire courtyard. Outside, chaos erupted. Mrs. Zhang came out sniffing the air. Urgu started wailing that he could smell braised pork and wanted some. The children in Mrs. Lee's household burst into tears demanding meat. Mrs. Huang's kids did the same. The mothers screamed at them to shut up, which only made them cry harder. I had no idea my cooking had turned the whole yard into a concert of sobbing children. When Uncle and Aunt walked into the courtyard, they immediately smelled it too. Uncle wondered aloud which family was cooking something so incredible. Aunt jabbed him. She said if the smell was that good, maybe he should just stand there breathing it in until he was full. Uncle backpedaled instantly, declaring that his wife's cooking was always the best. She rolled her eyes, but let him off the hook. As they walked deeper inside, the smell grew stronger. They exchanged a glance and quickened their pace. The new bicycle in the yard stopped them cold. They both gasped. Then Lingy opened the door and a wave of fragrance hit them. But before they could ask about the bike, she told them to come eat first. Dinner was ready, and she'd been waiting forever. I carried out a big basin of braised pork. Uncle and Aunt forgot the bicycle instantly, washed their hands, and sat down. Uncle poured himself a glass of erguo too. The rest of us each had a bottle of Arctic Ocean soda. The pork was tender, rich, perfectly glazed. Everyone ate in happy silence. Halfway through, Uncle finally asked about the bicycle. He didn't need to wait for me. Lingy had been bursting to tell the story. She walked them through every detail. The police station, the reward, the rescue, and naturally her own heroic role in calling the police that day. She finished by proudly pulling out her 50 yuan, grinning from ear to ear. Uncle and Aunt were both stunned by the evening's revelations. Uncle gave me a thumbs up and said Dad had looked completely dazed when he received his bicycle yesterday. If Uncle told him tomorrow that I'd earned 2 bikes and a radio in just a few days, Dad would probably die of shame. I'd made more in a week than Dad earned in years. Aunt said I was incredible even without a real job, and once I started working, there'd be no stopping me. Uncle puffed up proudly, asking whose nephew did they think I was. Lingy demanded some praise too, and everyone laughed. Uncle called her a future heroine. Then Aunt smoothly convinced Lingy to hand over the 50 yuan for safekeeping. The grin vanished from Lingy's face as she reluctantly surrendered the money. I chuckled to myself. Lesson learned. When you get rich, keep your mouth shut. Everyone agreed my cooking was better than any state restaurant. Uncle meant it sincerely, and Aunt and Lingy both nodded. I just smiled. With master-level Sichuan cuisine skills, braised pork was child's play. That night in bed, Uncle and Aunt couldn't sleep. Uncle brought up something unexpected. He wanted to send me to the far northwest to check on his older brother, my eldest uncle, who'd been exiled there with his family. Life out there was brutally hard, but Uncle didn't dare send money or supplies through normal channels. He needed someone trustworthy to go in person, carrying cash and tickets to buy necessities locally. He couldn't think of anyone better suited than me. Aunt was worried. The Northwest was dangerous, and if anyone found out I'd visited a condemned man, it could bring trouble down on everyone. But she understood Uncle's pain. This had been weighing on him terribly. They agreed to keep it secret and think it over carefully. Uncle would also ask Dad's opinion. I knew nothing about this conversation. In my room, I entered the Spirit Spring space and harvested the mature crops. I set aside the portion promised to old Zhang and replanted everything else, expanding the farmland several times over. 3 baby chicks had just hatched, with more eggs about to break open. The rabbits had grown noticeably in just one day. I soaked in the spring for an hour. My body was getting stronger fast. I could now lift 300 jin with one hand without straining. I set my internal clock for 2 in the morning. When I woke, I dressed quietly, left a note on the table, stored the bicycle in my Spirit Spring space, and slipped out of the courtyard. Once outside, I pulled the bike out and rode straight for Dishengmen. At the ghost market, I stashed the bicycle back in the space and wrapped a cloth around my face. I muttered to myself that I looked like some kind of bandit. The ghost market was eerie. Dim oil lamps sat next to each stall, casting tiny pools of light. The sellers sat just beyond the glow, nothing but dark silhouettes. It was genuinely creepy. I figured out the system by watching others. Each stall had a lamp that buyers could pick up to examine the goods. I crouched at the first stall and looked through a dozen items. But despite my advantage of being from the future, I couldn't identify a single thing. In my previous life, I'd never dealt with antiques or collectibles. I could only shake my head. Over the next hour, I browsed all several dozen stalls. There were snuff bottles, incense burners, jade pieces, bronze coins, silver dollars, porcelain, calligraphy, paintings, everything imaginable. Some items caught my eye, but I didn't ask any prices. I was completely ignorant about this world, and I didn't want to reveal that by saying something stupid. Today was just about taking the first step, getting a feel for the place. No purchases, no deals. I'd come back another time once I knew more. I left the ghost market satisfied that I'd at least found it and understood how it worked. I was about to leave the ghost market when a raspy old voice stopped me. "Young man, I've been watching you." "First time here, isn't it?" I paused and looked at the dark figure sitting behind the first stall. I asked how he could tell. He said he'd been here over 10 years and could spot newcomers instantly. Experienced buyers only stopped at stalls that interested them. I'd examined every single one and bought nothing. A dead giveaway. He wasn't the only one who'd noticed. He asked what I was looking for and offered to help. I told him we were strangers and asked why he'd help me. I said if he had something to sell, I'd buy one piece to take home and have an elder examine it. But no fakes. I'd come back and find him if he cheated me. I used the term blind goods deliberately to show I wasn't completely ignorant of this world's language. That got his attention. He stood up, about 5 feet tall, with plenty of white hair. Definitely over 60. He told his neighbor, a man called Old Gunhead, to watch his stall, then said he'd take me to see his real collection. He told me to follow if I had the guts. Old Gunhead was surprised. He called the old man, Panchier, and said this was unlike him. Panchier sighed and admitted his grandson was sick, the family had no food, and he was desperate. He said he had a feeling about me and was willing to gamble. I followed without hesitation. Panchier turned into another alley that appeared to be a dead end. At the wall, he pushed a hidden section and it slid aside, revealing a passage. After I stepped through, he sealed it behind us with a click, a special mechanism that locked the wall from the inside. My Spirit Spring sensing power confirmed no one could open it from the other side now. 2 more turns through narrow alleys, and we reached a small courtyard. I scanned it with my sensing ability, no other people. Inside a room, he struck a match and lit a kerosene lamp. Panchier was exactly as I'd imagined. Extremely thin, looking like a strong wind could knock him over, with a prominent black mole on his nose. But my eyes quickly left him because the room was lined with shelves holding an incredible collection: porcelain, jade, cloisonne, bronzeware. The porcelain pieces alone filled most of the space, bottles and jars of every shape. He asked if I wasn't afraid of following a stranger to a hidden location where nobody would hear me scream. I laughed and told him if anyone should be scared, it was him. I could see everything he owned, and he was far too skinny to stop me. He snorted and said he'd been reading people his whole life, and my voice told him I wasn't that kind of person. He told me to take off my face covering. When he saw how young I was, his face fell. He'd clearly expected someone older. I could feel his disappointment. A kid couldn't possibly afford what he needed. I told him to stop looking down on me and that I wouldn't have followed him if I couldn't pay. I walked straight to a blue and white porcelain vase. I couldn't explain why, but something about it pulled me in. It gave me a feeling of deep age, of centuries passing. I picked it up. Panchier nearly had a heart attack. He begged me to be careful and said that piece wasn't for sale. He called it a genuine Yuan Dynasty blue and white porcelain, the real thing. I grinned, set the vase down, then reached into my bag and pulled out an aluminum lunchbox. Earlier tonight, I'd cooked extra braised pork beyond what the family ate, sealed it in a new container, and stored it in my Spirit Spring Space warehouse. I opened the lid, and instantly the room filled with the rich, intoxicating smell of red braised pork belly. I told the old man I was hungry and needed to eat before we talked business. I pulled out chopsticks and 2 big meat buns from my bag, right next to the open lunchbox of braised pork. The smell filled the entire room. Panchier's stomach growled loudly. His eyes locked onto the food like a starving wolf. He offered me a jade snuff bottle in exchange for the pork and buns. I refused. I told him I was only interested in the Yuan Dynasty blue and white porcelain vase. If he'd sell me that, I might throw in the food as a bonus. I took a big bite of a meat bun, making the aroma even stronger. Panchier swallowed hard, and his stomach betrayed him again. He cursed me for being the first person to ever bring braised pork to a ghost market. Finally, he caved. For the blue and white vase, he wanted 100 gene of coarse grain, 50 gene of fine grain, 10 gene of meat, plus 100 yuan cash. He also taught me the market slang. 1 tree meant 100 yuan, 1 sheet meant 10, 1 fun actually meant 1 yuan, and dry stick meant fixed price, no haggling. I told him the vase alone wasn't enough. I pointed to 3 more pieces, 2 other porcelain bottles, and a Tang Dynasty 3-color glazed piece, and said I wanted all 4 for that price. Panchier literally jumped off the ground. He started yelling at me to get out, calling me insane. I laughed and handed him a meat bun as a peace offering, telling him not to get angry. He glared at me, but snatched the bun and devoured it in 3 bites. The man was clearly starving. The moment he finished, I grinned and told him he'd just accepted my deposit. Those 4 items were now mine. He was dumbfounded, sputtering that the bun was a gift, not a deposit. I told him a deal was a deal. After more back and forth, he demanded I add 10 more gene of meat, or no deal. I agreed immediately. I had plenty. I told him I needed to go get the goods from a companion and would be back in 15 minutes. I asked if he'd swap my pieces for fakes while I was gone. He was genuinely offended, saying his reputation in this circle was everything and he'd never do such a thing. I left the braised pork on the table for him. When I stepped outside, I went to a dark corner and waited a few minutes, watching his house to make sure nothing suspicious happened. Then I pulled everything from my Spirit Spring Space, grain, meat, fish, and loaded it into bags. Nearly 200 gene total, but with my strength it felt like nothing. When I returned, Panchier checked everything carefully and confirmed it was all correct. He told me to take the 4 pieces quickly before he changed his mind. He couldn't even look at them as I gathered them up. They were clearly treasures he hated parting with. He muttered that I knew nothing about antiques, yet somehow had the sharpest eye he'd ever seen. I told him I'd be back to visit and would bring even more braised pork next time. He blew up, shouting at me to get lost and never come back. But I could see the reluctance in his eyes. He was already missing those pieces. I laughed all the way out, ducked into a dark alley, and swept everything into my spirit spring space warehouse. Then I entered the space myself to do the day's check-in. The chimes sounded. 100 gene of lamb, sent to the warehouse. I smiled. Now I had pork, beef, and lamb. My meat collection was complete. I left the space, pulled out my bicycle, and rode off into the pre-dawn darkness. After the ghost market adventure, dawn wasn't far off, so I headed straight for the black market. I still needed more meat for old Zhang's deal, and had just given Pan Xier a chunk of my grain reserves. Near the destination, I stashed my bicycle, strapped on a large basket covered with black cloth, and wrapped my face. At the entrance, 2 tough-looking men charged admission, 5 fun to buy, 15 fun to sell. I paid the seller's fee and walked in. The black market was much busier than the ghost market. Dozens of stalls sold everything imaginable: coarse grain, fine grain, cotton, shoes, vegetables, pork, chicken, duck, fish, lamb. I went straight to a pork stall where half a pig was laid out. Over 100 gene. The seller, a man in his 30s with a teenage boy beside him, quoted his prices: 1.35 yuan per gene for standard cuts with skin, fat, and lean mixed together, no choosing. Special cuts were 1.50, and bony pieces were 1.15. About 30% above cooperative prices, but that included the cost of not needing a meat ticket. I told him I'd take the whole half. He thought for a moment and offered 1.28 per gene for buying it all. Total came to 157 yuan for 123 gene. I paid without hesitation. He asked if I wanted more. He had the other half and the head too. I told him to go get it, and I'd be right back. I carried the basket out, ducked into an empty alley, and swept everything into my spirit spring space. Back at the stall, I bought the second half, the pig head, and every organ: heart, stomach, liver, kidneys, lungs. Nearly 200 yuan more. Then I went back for grain, several hundred gene, hauled out in multiple trips. I bought another half pig at a different stall before finally stopping. By now dawn was breaking and the market was filling up. My spending spree hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone estimated I'd dropped 700 or 800 yuan. A few men were watching me with unfriendly eyes. I noticed them but wasn't worried. I'd spent almost everything again, so I needed to sell something to recover. I pulled fish from my spirit spring space into the basket and set up shop. My fish attracted attention immediately. Spirit spring raised fish, each one over 5 gene, barely any fishy smell. I priced them at 6 yuan each, no fish ticket needed. People balked at first, saying that was too expensive when pork was only 1.30 a gene. I explained that cooperative fish cost 80 fin a gene plus a ticket, and mine were much bigger, practically odorless, and wouldn't be available every day. This was a rare find from a deep mountain lake, I told them. When I saw people wavering, I threw in a hook. The first 10 buyers could have them for 5.50 each. That broke the dam. People started grabbing fish and shoving money at me, arguing over who'd spotted which one first. The crowd around me exploded with activity. I brought out only grass carp and common carp, the 2 most popular fish in this era. Once the first few sold, the rest went fast. 100 fish gone in under half an hour. I didn't dare pull out more. It would have exceeded what my basket could believably hold. Most sold at 5.50 each, bringing in 476 yuan plus various ration tickets. As I was packing up, I heard angry complaints echoing through the market. People had come specifically to buy pork, only to find none left. Someone cursed the greedy person who'd bought 1.5 whole pigs. Another said meat only appeared here every 5 days or so, and this time some selfish buyer had cleaned everything out. I realized with a jolt that selfish buyer was me. I'd assumed the black market always had meat available. Time to disappear before anyone connected the dots. I grabbed my empty basket, secretly dropped a few stones inside to give it weight, and hurried out. Immediately, I sensed 4 figures tailing me. I smirked. I had nothing better to do, so I'd play along. I walked into a quiet alley, and they followed without hesitation. The leader, a man with hair hanging over his eyes, told me to hand over my money. His 3 friends held wooden clubs, sneering. I pretended to be terrified and backed away, stammering about calling the police. They burst out laughing, calling me a naive little lamb. One of them, Lai Lao-san, swaggered toward me, promising to knock me down in 2 moves. I suddenly shouted past them, "Officers, Thank goodness you're here. They're trying to rob me. All four whipped their heads around to look. In that instant, I dropped my basket, grabbed the stones, and hurled them at their thighs. Everyone hit dead on with serious force. They screamed like they'd been struck by hammers. Before they could recover, I charged into the nearest one chest first. He flew backward into the wall and blacked out. I kicked the leader in the stomach so hard he crashed into the man behind him, both howling. The last one hadn't even turned back around before my sweep kick put him on the ground. 3 quick punches, and all 4 were unconscious. I stripped them completely naked, every stitch of clothing, underwear included. I found over 70 yuan and some ration tickets in their pockets, which I kept as spoils. I lined their bare bodies neatly against the wall, grinned, and walked away. A few hundred meters on, I tossed their clothes into a garbage heap. Around a corner, I packed away the basket, removed my face covering, pulled out my bicycle, and rode off. Shortly after, someone discovered 4 naked men passed out in the alley and reported it to the neighborhood office. The patrol officers recognized them as known troublemakers, found them some pants, and hauled them away while onlookers pointed and laughed. The 4 wished the ground would swallow them. I stopped at a state restaurant and bought several dozen meat buns, startling the staff. I decided to head home to the village tomorrow. I missed Grandpa, Grandma, Mom, and all my sisters. I stored most of the buns in my Spirit Spring space, kept 3 plus a cup of soy milk, and ate while pushing my bicycle along the street. The soy milk tasted wonderful, thick and creamy, nothing like the watered-down stuff sold decades later. Then I grabbed 2 big grass carp from the space, one about 5 jin, one about 4, and rode to Aunt Zhang Shimei's supply cooperative. Director Xiong had given me that fine tin of Longjing tea yesterday, and proper manners demanded I return the gesture. Keeping relationships alive meant giving back. When I walked in, Aunt Zhang greeted me with surprise. I told her I'd caught some fish and brought 2 over, one for her and one for Director Xiong. I handed her the 4-gene fish and asked if the director was around. Aunt Zhang tried to refuse the fish, saying it was worth several yuan. I told her I'd caught 7 or 8, and Uncle's family couldn't eat them all. 1 fish was nothing to fuss over. She hesitated, then accepted with a smile. Director Xiong came out of his office, having heard my voice. I handed him the bigger fish, and he took it with a grin, calling me a stand-up kid. Yesterday's tea had been a casual gesture on his part, but my returning the favor with a fish cemented our relationship. The Uncle Xiong title was now official. I chatted briefly and left. I hit several more cooperatives and went on a shopping spree for the family back home. For Grandpa, 2 bottles of Mao Tai, a carton of Zhonghua cigarettes, a carton of peony cigarettes, and 10 bottles of Red Star Erguo 2. For Grandma, cream fried cakes, donkey rolls, and a bolt of floral fabric. For the kids, candied hawthorn sticks, fruit leather, and over 20 bottles of Arctic Ocean soda, each requiring a bottle deposit. I also bought sesame flatbreads, oil cakes, and fried dough rings, the famous breakfast trio of this era. After all that, I was down to 300 yuan. Money in this era went far, but not at my spending rate. Back at Uncle's, everyone had gone to work. 3 eggs in the pot as usual. I ate 1 and crashed. When I woke in the afternoon, Lingy was reading. She'd checked on me at noon, but let me sleep. I ate the corn porridge she'd left warming, then headed to the kitchen with a plan: red braised lamb tonight. I pulled out about 5 jin, enough to cook extra and bring some home to the grandparents. The aroma drifted through the house, and Lingy appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes sparkling. She asked if it was lamb, a rare treat. She told me that since I'd arrived, the family's meals had improved by several levels, and my cooking was far better than her mom's. She begged me to stay forever. I ruffled her hair and told her I couldn't. My village introduction letter was only good for 7 days, and I was heading home tomorrow. Her face fell, but she didn't argue. The lamb smell floated across the whole courtyard. The 3 wives hurried home and locked their children inside their rooms to prevent another crying incident. When Uncle and Aunt arrived, they smelled the meat from the yard entrance. They exchanged a rueful look. They'd just bought a gene of pork at the cooperative, planning to treat me to pepper-fried pork. Instead, I was treating them again. Since my arrival, they'd had more meat than in the previous several months combined. Over dinner, I told them I was leaving tomorrow. Uncle paused, then said it made sense. The grandparents would be missing me. I sensed he wanted to say something more but held back, so I didn't press. I mentioned I had to go out tonight and wouldn't be back until around 9. I had the deal with old Zhang to complete. Uncle frowned and warned me the city wasn't completely safe at night. I nodded and promised to be careful. After dinner, I grabbed a bag with 30 jin of corn flour, the payment I'd promised Grandma Dong for the reclining chair Elder Dong was making. I was leaving tomorrow and the chair wouldn't be ready yet, but I wanted to deliver the grain now so they wouldn't worry. For their family, this wasn't just flour. It could be the difference between surviving and not. I told Uncle what I was doing, and he nodded approvingly. I carried the bag to the Dong family's door and knocked. Elder Dong's voice called from inside, and a moment later he opened the door. Elder Dong smiled when he saw me and invited me in. I told him I was heading back to the village tomorrow and wouldn't be in the city for a while. I handed over the 30 jin of corn flour, his payment for the reclining chair. I told him to take his time making it. I'd pick it up on my next visit. He accepted gratefully and promised to build me the sturdiest chair he could. With this grain, his family could breathe a little easier. Back at Uncle's house, he waved me over with a serious expression. Aunt served us tea and shooed Lingy to her room. The girl left with her lips pouted high. Uncle took a long sip, exhaled heavily, and told me he had something important to discuss. He'd already spoken to Dad about it, and Dad said the decision was mine. It was about my eldest uncle, Li Jianfei. He'd been in the far northwest for 2 years now, suffering through harsh conditions. Uncle Li had wanted to send supplies, but people were watching him, so he never dared. The northwest was nothing but yellow sand and misery, and everyone feared eldest uncle might not survive. Someone needed to go check on him in person, carrying money and tickets to buy necessities there. Uncle and Aunt couldn't go without drawing suspicion. Mom and Dad couldn't either, especially now that Dad had started his factory job. After thinking it through, Uncle decided I was the best choice. I had no job, nobody was paying close attention to me, and with proper paperwork from the village, I could travel without raising red flags. He warned me it was dangerous. If I didn't want to go, he'd understand. I didn't hesitate. Memories of my eldest uncle flooded my mind. He and his wife had treated the original Lu Pingyan like their own son. I told Uncle I'd go, and asked when I should leave. Relief washed over his face. He said to give him a week to gather national grain tickets, meat tickets, and medicine. The train ride alone would take 6 days each way. With transfers and possible delays, I need a travel permit for at least 20 days. He knew the train conductor on the northwest route and would arrange the tickets. He just asked me to clear it with Grandpa and Grandma first. I promised I'd handle the grandparents and they'd agree. Aunt spoke up for the first time, warning me to tell absolutely no one beyond the grandparents and Mom. I assured her I understood. With that settled, I headed out for my appointment with old Zhang. Having a real weapon would be essential, not just for hunting back home, but for protection in the northwest, where wolves roamed. I arrived near old Zhang's place at 8:30. Using my sensing ability, I confirmed old Lu Failong, was there too, and nothing felt dangerous. I pulled everything from my spirit spring space, 100 jin of corn flour, 400 jin of raw corn, 50 jin each of mung beans and red beans, 50 jin of pork, 50 jin of beef, plus 200 yuan cash. Then I added 10 extra jin of pork and 50 jin of corn flour for the ammunition, and knocked. Old Lu opened the door with old Zhang right behind him. They saw the mountain of goods and nodded approvingly. Everything was hauled inside quickly. Old Zhang's worried frown disappeared as he checked each item. I asked if the extra meat and flour were enough for the bullets. He nodded. He'd gotten me 180 rounds, even more than the 100 I'd asked for. Then he went to get the rifle. I could see the reluctance in his eyes as he handed it over, but a deal was a deal. I inspected the AKM carefully. Everything checked out. The weight in my hands felt like an old friend returning. With this gun and nearly 200 rounds, I could hunt freely in the mountains and travel to the northwest with real protection. I asked old Zhang where I could buy more ammunition when I ran out. He said the black market had them, and if I couldn't find any, I could come to him. He knew people. I thanked both men and left with Lu Failong. On the way, I asked old Lu to collect national ration tickets for me over the next week. Meat, grain, cloth, the essential ones. He agreed. Then he handed me a stack of tickets from his cousin Lu Yuanshan at the Red Star Textile Factory. Apparently, some senior officials had visited the factory, tasted my fish, and praised them as far better than anything they usually ate. Lu Yuanshan was grateful and willing to raise the price for future deliveries. I told old Lu I'd have the village catch more fish and contact his cousin directly. Back at Uncle's house, everyone was still awake waiting for me. Uncle handed me a cloth bag with 10 jin of fine grain and 2 jin of apples for the family back home. He reminded me to tell the grandparents about the Northwest trip and not keep it secret. Dad would come home in a couple of days too, so I could discuss things with him. I wanted to refuse the gifts. I had more than enough, but decided to accept gracefully. I'd leave something for Uncle's family in return tomorrow morning. In the Spirit Spring space that night, things were thriving. 8 baby chicks now followed the 2 adult wild chickens, each about a jin already. The 9 young rabbits had grown considerably, and the mother rabbit looked pregnant again. The river had fewer big fish since I'd sold most of them, but over 2,000 small ones were swimming around. I soaked in the spring for an hour and felt my body becoming even more agile and powerful. The next morning's check-in reward was perfect timing. 300 jin of national grain tickets. Exactly what I needed for the Northwest trip. National tickets worked anywhere in the country, and without them, you couldn't buy food even with cash. Uncle and Aunt had already left for work. Lingy, who usually loved sleeping in, was up early. She looked miserable about me leaving. No more braised pork dinners. She walked me to the courtyard gate with her lips pouted. The 3 courtyard wives, on the other hand, were visibly relieved to see me go. My daily meat cooking had caused their children to cry for food every evening, earning them extra beatings that hurt the mothers' hearts too. I waved goodbye to Lingy, loaded Uncle's gifts on the back of my bicycle, and rode out of the city. Once I found an empty stretch of road, I stored the bag in my Spirit Spring space and pedaled fast toward Lupang village. The village was buzzing with activity. Autumn harvest had begun. People stopped working when they saw someone riding a shiny new bicycle with a big basket on his back. Second uncle spotted me first, dropped his sickle, and came running to the road. My cousin Lu Dachui and another relative Lu Chi were with him. They all stared at the bicycle with wide eyes. Lu Chi asked if it belonged to my uncle in the city. I grinned and told them it was mine, a reward from the police for helping them with something in the capital. All 3 were stunned. In the countryside, the 3 big items for a wedding were a bicycle, a sewing machine, and a radio. But out here, most families only bothered with the sewing machine since it was practical. A brand new bicycle was a rare and impressive thing. Lu Dachui gave me a big thumbs up. Second uncle laughed and asked me to teach him how to ride. In our whole family, only Dad knew how. He said he dreamed of cycling to the city instead of walking for over an hour. I agreed to teach second uncle how to ride and told him the bicycle would be at home whenever he wanted to practice. He reminded me that the grandparents had been talking about me dozens of times a day since I left, and I should hurry home. I gave each of the 3 men 2 white rabbit candies and rode off before they could refuse. I knew they wouldn't eat them. They'd save them for their kids. At the village entrance, a crowd of children was playing. They all called out, "Uncle Pinyin," when they saw me. I stopped and told them to line up. Everyone would get 1 white rabbit candy. Over 20 kids formed a line instantly, faces glowing with excitement. Each one said thank you as I handed them a candy. After I finished, I noticed almost every child was licking the wrapper instead of eating the actual candy. They couldn't bear to finish it so fast. It stung my heart a little. Kids born in this era really had it rough. I rode straight to the grandparents' house. Several little cousins were playing in the yard, and Yundong spotted me first. She shrieked and launched herself at me. I jumped off the bike just in time to catch her. She wrapped her arms around my neck, giggling wildly. Cousin Yunju shouted into the house that I was back. I heard a teacup crash to the floor inside, followed by Grandma's voice demanding to know where her grandson was. Grandpa scolded her for knocking over his tea. Both of them appeared moments later, Grandma practically running. She grabbed my hands and looked me up and down. Only after confirming I hadn't gotten thinner did she relax. It meant I'd been eating well in the city. Grandpa noticed the big basket on my back and told her to let me put it down. She snapped at him for not helping, then fussed over me about the weight. I reached into my bag and pulled out candied hawthorn sticks for all 7 cousins present. They thanked me in chorus. Grandma immediately reminded them to remember their big brother's kindness. The eldest cousin, Yunlan, promised they all would. Grandpa had lingered outside, studying the new bicycle with a thoughtful expression. When he came in, He asked about it right away. I told them the same story. The police had rewarded it to me for helping catch some criminals. Grandma's reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't care about the bicycle at all. She grabbed my arms and checked me for injuries, telling me never to help the police catch criminals again. If I wanted a bicycle, she and Grandpa would buy me one. Grandpa backed her up firmly, saying they'd already set aside enough money for me to live comfortably my whole life. There was no need to take risks. They didn't want me to achieve great things. They just wanted me safe and sound. That last part caught me off guard. From the way Grandpa spoke, they had a serious amount saved up. But that didn't make sense. If they had real wealth, the family wouldn't be living this poorly. Grandma saw my confusion and explained. Grandpa wasn't lying. They prepared things for me that would last a lifetime. But conditions in recent years had made it dangerous to reveal what they had. Once it passed to my generation, the restrictions wouldn't be as tight. She told me that when I had time, Grandpa would take me to see it. Our family is not short on money, she said firmly. I stared at my grandparents, stunned. What exactly were they hiding?